The thing in the ninth pen was already at the glass when Cal came down the service line with the feed cart, and it did not move the way the manual said it should. The manual said a Dreadnought tracked motion. They said it fixed on the nearest warm shape and coiled to strike, that a handler who stopped walking was a handler who had chosen to die. Every keeper on the threshold's conditioning wing walked the service line fast and never straight, cutting angles, keeping the shock rail between themselves and the reinforced panels. Cal walked slow. He had walked slow for 11 weeks, and Specimen 9 had learned the sound of the cart's bad wheel the way a farm dog learns the sound of a truck. It stood pressed to the barrier with all three eyes open, plated hide the color of wet slate. The long muscle of it laid flat against the floor and its wide skull tipped so one amber eye came level with his. It was the size of a hunting hound gone wrong, too broad in the shoulder, too much jaw, a pup that had already killed and had not yet finished growing into what it would be. The staff called it the monster. The staff were not wrong. "Slow now," Cal said. He set the cart's brake. He did not look straight at it. That was the whole trick if it was a trick. You did not stare a predator down when you had no fangs of your own. Down the line a warning strip flared amber and a voice cracked from the ceiling grill. "Orden, you're stopped at 9. Keep moving, Cadet, that's a live specimen." The voice belonged to a night shift keeper named Brack, watching him on the deck cameras and probably not looking up from his meal. It maimed Chorus last cycle, peeled him to the bone. "I know," Cal said, "not for Brack, for the pen." He crouched. He kept his hands where the animal could see them, and he broke a strip of the pale marrowloaf off the ration block and laid it flat on his palm and slid it into the feed slot, and he did not push. That was the second half of it. He never pushed. He set the food down and drew his hand back and waited, and the Dreadnought pup looked at the food and then looked at him. Long. The way nothing in that facility looked at anyone. And then it took the marrow off the tray with a delicacy that would have stopped Brack's heart if Brack had bothered to watch. "There," Cal said, "there you go." The thing ate. Its throat worked. When it was done, it did not retreat to the back of the pen the way it did for every other keeper on the roster. It stayed at the glass, and it pressed the broad plate of its skull flat against the panel, right where his hand had been, and it held there, breathing, three eyes half-lidded, and something low happened in its chest that Cal felt in his own. A sound below hearing, a pressure against the sternum, the Dreadnought equivalent, the manual said, of a killing challenge. The manuals were wrong about that too. Cal had heard it enough times now to know it was the other thing. It was the sound a Dreadnought made when it had decided you were not food and not enemy but the third category, the one the Sethiri had no word for and the manuals did not list, because the Sethiri had never once earned it and did not believe it existed. "Orden," the grill again sharper, "off the line now. Dragon's on the morning deck, and if he sees a cadet nose to nose with 9, he'll have your billet." Cal stood. He put his palm flat on the glass once, and the pup tracked the movement of his hand and went still under it. And then he took his palm away and released the cart brake and walked on down the line at his slow and steady pace, past the grisho that had stopped throwing itself at its door 3 weeks ago when he started humming, past the pit, where the thornbacks slept in a knot of overlapping armor, past the sealed dark cell at the end of the wing that nobody fed because whatever was in it was not being kept alive, and he took the freight lift up to the barracks tier. And he did not think about how the pup's eyes had followed him to the corner, because thinking about it too hard was a way of wanting something, and wanting things was how a cadet on the bottom rung got them taken away. He was 19. He had come up from a stock world called Mare, 300 head of grazers and a family that raised them, and he had tested into the Coalition's Service Corps because the recruiter said the Corps fed you and the grazers did not. Nobody on Mare had told him the Coalition's idea of service for a human was the threshold, the great gray drum of a station where the Sethiri broke the apex predators of a dozen conquered worlds into war beasts, and where the human cadets shoveled and hosed and hauled the parts of that work the Sethiri found beneath them. He had not minded the shoveling. He minded the breaking. He had watched them break a Grisha with a shock collar and a starvation cycle, and a keeper with a goad pole, 3 days of it, until the animal that had once stood 8 feet at the shoulder would flatten itself and void itself at the sight of the pole, and he had gone back to the barracks and been sick, quietly, and told no one. The Dreadnought was the one they could not break. That was why it was still alive. Overseer Dragon kept it alive the way a man keeps a debt on a ledger, and Cal had understood without being told that the day the Dreadnought was declared unbreakable was the day it would be declared something else, and put down in front of an audience to prove the doctrine still held. He had not meant to be the one it trusted. He had just been slow and quiet, and there every night, and it had chosen him the way weather chooses a field. From the observation deck, 40 feet up behind the armored glass, the junior keeper Senet Ver watched the human cadet crouch at Specimen 9's panel and lay his hand flat and feed the monster from his palm, and she felt her quills lift along the back of her neck in a way that had nothing to do with cold. She had a data slate balanced on the rail. She was supposed to be logging night cycle specimen behavior for the conditioning report, which meant she was supposed to be writing down aggression indices and compliance failures, the standard columns, the ones that fed up the chain to Overseer Dragon, and from Dragon up to the Prime Assessor's office in a language of numbers everyone had agreed to pretend was the truth. She had written nothing for 4 minutes. She was watching a Class 9 apex specimen, the classification the Coalition reserved for animals that had killed handlers, that could not be transported without a stun cradle, that were valued at more than the annual budget of a border world, press its skull to the glass under a human's open hand and go soft. Senet was young for the deck. She had come out of the Keeper's College on the Sethiri homeworld 2 seasons ago with the highest marks in dominance conditioning her cohort had produced, and she had believed, the way you believe things you have been graded on, that the doctrine was simply true. The doctrine was old and clean, and it fit inside the head like a good tool. A beast obeyed the thing it feared. You made yourself the largest, highest, most inescapable fear in the animal's world, and then obedience flowed downhill from that fear like water, and the beast became a weapon in the hand of the one it feared most. It had built the Sethiri's War Beast Corps. It had won 3 annexations. It was, everyone agreed, the reason the galaxy's apex predators marched under Sethiri banners instead of eating Sethiri children. The doctrine did not have a column for what she was watching. "You're not writing," said the keeper beside her, Brack older, soft in the middle, one of the night deck fixtures who had stopped caring which specimens lived. He had his feet up. "Whatever the human's doing, don't log it. Trust me. Dragon reads the night sheets himself when the assessor's coming, and he does not want to read that 9 has a favorite." "It has a favorite," Senet said. "It has a feeding associate," Brack said, which was the safe phrase, the one that meant nothing. "Right compliance failure, aggression index 4, note the specimen accepted feed. That's all that happened." Senet looked at the column on her slate. Aggression index 4. On the standard scale, 4 was a specimen that would take your arm if you were careless. She looked back down at the human, who had stood now, and put his palm to the glass one more time, and was walking away down the line at that unhurried pace that should by every law of the doctrine have gotten him killed 11 weeks ago. The Dreadnought's 3 eyes tracked him to the corner and held on the corner after he was gone. She wrote, "Aggression Index 4, Specimen Accepted Feed." And then, because she was young and had not yet learned all the way down into her bones what it cost to write the truth in a place built on a comfortable lie, she wrote one more line, small, in the notes field where nobody read. Specimen displays selective non-aggression toward Cadet C. Orden. Recommend behavioral study. She did not know yet that the line would matter. She did not know that Dragon read the notes field too. The Prime Assessor's inspection was announced 11 days out, and the whole gray drum of the threshold changed the way a house changes when a hard relative is coming to stay. Overseer Dragon announced it himself, on the wing floor, standing on the raised keeper's platform with his hands folded behind his back and his crest, the tall fan of quills that marked a high-status theory, combed and oiled, and standing at full display. He was a large male, old enough to have run the conditioning wing for 20 seasons, and he had the particular stillness of a creature that had learned long ago it never had to move fast because everything moved out of its way. When he spoke, the human cadets in the pit stopped hosing and stood, and the keepers on the deck stopped talking, and even the Grisho down the line went quiet, because the Grisho had learned dragons voice the way a broken thing learns the sound of the thing that broke it. Prime Assessor Olith arrives on the 11th day, Dragon said. She comes to certify this wing's conditioning yield for the annexation of the Dream System. You will make her certification easy. He let that sit. There are, at present, 140 specimens under conditioning in this wing. 139 of them are compliant, yoked, and ready to be certified as war assets. He turned his head slow and looked down the line toward the 9th pen. There is one that is not. Cal, at the bottom of the pit with a hose in his hands, did not look up. He had learned that too. Specimen 9 is a Class 9 Drenok, the last viable juvenile of the Dream Apex line, Dragon said, and there was something almost fond in how he said it, the fondness of a man for a valuable object. It's damn killed 6 of my keepers before we cradled her. It has killed none only because it is young and we have not given it the chance. The assessor will wish to see it certified or condemned. I intend to give her a demonstration. On the day of the inspection, Specimen 9 will enter the conditioning ring, and we will show the prime assessor precisely what the doctrine does with an unbreakable animal. He smiled then. It was not a thing Sethiri faces did easily. The smile pulled the plated skin around his jaw into an expression that had learned to imitate warmth without ever having felt the thing it imitated. Up on the deck, watching, Senat felt the quills go up along her neck again. Assignments will post tonight, Dragon said. Dismissed. The platform cleared. The hosing resumed, and Cal, coiling his line, felt rather than saw the overseer's attention move down the length of the pit and settle on him, and stay, one beat too long, the way a hand settles on a thing it has decided to pick up later. He kept hosing. But that night, when the assignments posted to the barracks board, he read his name where he had never expected to see it, and understood that the 11 days had a shape now, and that he was inside the shape. Cadet C. Orden, reassigned, night sanitation to specimen handling. Primary handler of record, Specimen 9, for the duration of inspection preparation and the ring demonstration. Primary handler of record. Him, a first-year cadet from a stock world, made the handler of record for a Class 9 Apex on the exact day it was to be walked into a ring and killed to prove a point. He stood a long time in front of the board. A handler of record was the name on the incident report. A handler of record was who they wrote down when a specimen killed someone. He was 19, and he was not stupid, and he understood that Dragon had just written his name in the column where you put the person you intend to leave holding the blame. He went down to the wing that night off shift, which was against every rule, and he crouched at the 9th pen in the dark with the emergency strips glowing low along the floor, and the Drenok came to the glass and pressed its skull to the place where his hand was, and the two of them stayed like that a while, the boy and the monster, the pressure of the animal's silent call thrumming against his chest. They're going to walk you into a ring, Cal told it low, and I'm the one who's supposed to hand you the leash. The Drenok breathed, its amber eye rolled to hold his. I'm not going to, Cal said. He didn't know yet how he'd keep it. He only knew, the way you know the ground is going to be there when you step, that he wasn't going to hand this animal to the pole. Slow now, we've got a little time. Up on the deck, Senat Ver, who had come down for a slate she'd left charging and had stopped in the stairwell shadow when she heard a human voice on a dark wing, stood very still and listened to a cadet promise a Class 9 predator that he would not betray it, and she did not log that either. but she carried it up the stairs with her, and it sat in her chest all night like a stone she could not set down, because she had just heard, in plain words on a dark floor, the thing the doctrine said could not exist: trust, given by an apex, to a small unarmed thing that had done nothing to earn it but be gentle and be there. She was Sethiri. She had been graded highest in her cohort in the breaking of exactly this kind of animal, and she lay awake that night in her keeper's berth and could not stop hearing the boy say slow, now, the way you'd say it to something you loved. Handler of record meant a keycard, and a keycard was the first thing Cal had ever been given at the threshold that opened doors instead of closing them. He learned the wing from the inside in 3 days, the way he'd learned the back 40 of his family's range as a boy, by walking it when nobody was watching. The conditioning wing was a long armored gallery with pens down both sides and the ring at the far end, and behind the pens ran a service crawl where the feed lines and the shock rail junctions and the old cargo manifests lived, and it was in the service crawl on the second night, tracing a feed line that had been fouling Nine's water, that Cal found the ledger the coalition did not know it was keeping. It was a maintenance slate, wall-mounted, gone to sleep. He woke it looking for the waterline schematic, and it opened on the last thing someone had left running, a cargo manifest, outbound, 6 weeks old, specimens, live transfer. 9 Grisho, 4 Thornbacks, 2 Venok, condition yoked, routed not to a coalition war corps depot, but to a private consignment at a transfer station called HFY Reach, against a payment code Cal did not recognize and a signature block he did, the overseer's dragons, with the certification field marked complete for animals that the wing's own records said had died in conditioning. Died in conditioning. He had hosed down 2 of those pens himself. He had been told the Grisho and Pen 31 had failed its cycle and been incinerated. Pen 31 had been empty and clean when he mopped it, and he had believed, because a cadet believed what the board said, that the animal was ash. It was not ash. It was sold, alive, off the books, to a buyer at HFY Reach, and the incineration was a line in a report, so that the coalition's count would balance and no one would go looking for a war beast that had been quietly turned into money. Cal stood in the service crawl with the blue light of the slate on his face and did the arithmetic of it. If a specimen died in conditioning, there was a body to account for. There was, at the threshold, a very simple way to produce a body that the record would accept and no one would examine: a handling accident. A specimen that killed a keeper was a specimen that had to be destroyed, and a destroyed specimen closed the ledger, and a dead keeper was a line in a different report, filed and forgotten. A cadet from a stock world nobody would come asking after. He thought about the sealed dark cell at the end of the wing, the one nobody fed. He thought about Chorus, peeled to the bone by 9 last cycle Chorus, who had been reassigned off the wing the week before it happened and put back on the night of it, primary handler of record, exactly the way Cal was now. He had heard the story as a warning about the monster. He heard it now as something else. He did not touch the manifest. He backed the slate to the water schematic he'd come for, and he fixed the fouled line, and he went back to the 9th pen and sat down against the glass with his spine to the panel and the Drenok on the other side. And for a while, he did not say anything at all. The pup shifted behind him. He felt the weight of it lie down against the barrier, spine to his spine through the glass, the way it had never done for anyone, and the silent call started up low and steady, and Cal let his head rest back against the panel and closed his eyes. "You didn't do it," he said finally. "Chorus, did you?" It wasn't a question, and the Drenok didn't answer it because it was an animal and not a story. But Cal had hosed enough pens to know the difference between a beast that killed because it was made and a beast that killed because it was cornered, and he had watched 9 take marrow off his open palm, 11 weeks, running with a jaw that could have taken his palm instead, and he knew which kind of thing was breathing against his back. He'd found the shape of Dragon's plan without meaning to. He was the body. 9 was the weapon and the closed ledger, both at once. A valuable specimen that had killed its handler, condemned in front of the prime assessor, doctrine upheld, corruption buried, all in one clean afternoon in the ring. And the only two who would know otherwise would be a 19-year-old human and a monster, and neither of them would be alive to file a note. Slow now, Cal said to himself as much as the pup. Slow. Senat found him in the service crawl the next night, because she had started following the human the way you worry a loose scale. She could not leave it alone. She came around the junction with her slate up like a shield, and found the cadet sitting on the deck grill with his knees up, and she stopped, and neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched. "You're not supposed to be back here," she said, which was absurd because neither was she. No, Cal agreed. She should have logged him. She should have flagged the reassigned cadet loitering unsupervised in a restricted maintenance space 3 days before a prime assessor's inspection, and let the system do what the system did. Instead, she crouched, across the narrow crawl from him, keeper, and cadet, and she surprised herself by asking the true question. "How did you do it?" she said. "With 9. In the college they told us the dreamed line couldn't be yoked. The dam killed 6. The doctrine says an animal that won't break breaks you, and it lets you feed it out of your hand." Cal looked at her for a while. Sathiri faces were hard for humans to read, and human faces were harder for Sathiri, and they sat there being unreadable at each other in the blue light. "I didn't do anything," Cal said. "That's the whole thing. I didn't do anything to it. You people do a great deal to them." He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "The collar, the pole, the starve cycle. You make yourself the worst thing in the room so the animal will do what you want to make the worst thing stop. And it works. I've seen it work." He nodded down the wing, toward the pen where the broken Grisha lived. "That's what it makes." "That's what a war beast is," Senat said, but it came out with less than she'd meant to put behind it. "That's what a broken thing is," Cal said. "I grew up with animals, not war beasts. Grazers, herd dogs, the mean old sire we kept for stock. You don't break a herd dog. You can. People do. But then you've got a dog that works because it's scared, and a dog that's scared makes mistakes, and one day the mistake is your throat. The dogs that are worth anything, you don't make yourself the biggest fear in their world. You make yourself the one thing in their world that never once hurt them. That's it. That's the whole secret. There isn't a technique." He shrugged, tired. "You just have to be the thing that never hurt them every day until they believe it, and you can't be that and hold a pole." Senat sat with that. It went against 20 seasons of doctrine and 2 of her own training, and it fit the thing she had watched with her own eyes on the deck, and the 2 facts ground against each other in her chest. "The Drenok trusts you," she said slowly, "because you have never given it a reason not to." 9, Cal said. "What?" "Its name's 9, or I don't know its name. It has one probably. Its dam probably had a way of." He stopped. "I call it slate, in my head, because of the color." "Don't put that in a report." "I won't put any of this in a report," Senat said, and realized as she said it that she meant it, and that meaning it had moved her quietly, across a line she could not step back over. She told him then. She hadn't planned to, but he had told her the truth about the animals, and it had cost him something to say it out loud to a Sathiri keeper, and the ledger of that felt wrong to leave unbalanced. "Dragon reads the notes field," she said. "On the night sheets. I wrote a line about 9's non-aggression toward you, 2 nights ago, before I understood what I was writing." She watched him take it. "He knows the specimen has a favorite. He knows it's you. He assigned you handler of record after he read it." "I know," Cal said. "I found the manifest." He told her about Hesk Reach, about the Grisha that were ash on paper and money in fact, about Pen 31 that he had mopped clean with his own hands, about Chorus reassigned off the wing and put back on the night he died. He said it flat, no drama, a Stockworld boy laying out the arithmetic, and Senat listened and felt the gray drum of the threshold rearrange itself around her into something she had been standing inside of for 2 seasons without seeing. He's going to do it in the ring, she said, in front of the prime assessor, the demonstration. That's how I read it. He walks 9 into the ring. He gives you the goad pole, the handler of record, and he pushes the specimen until it turns, and it turns on the nearest thing, which is you, and she stopped, because the shape of it was ugly all the way down. The assessor certifies the doctrine. Dragon condemns an unbreakable specimen and closes the file, and the dead cadet's family gets a letter. And nobody counts the Grisho at Hesk Reach, Cal said, because who audits a wing that just lost a keeper to a Class 9? The assessor signs off and goes home. They sat in the blue light. Down the wing, far off, the Dreadnought made its low sound, and it carried through the deck plating into the soles of their feet. I could take the manifest to the assessor, Senet said, when she comes. You could, Cal said. And Dragons had 20 seasons to make sure the manifest doesn't exist by the time she looks. He's not stupid. He's the opposite of stupid. The manifest goes away, the maintenance slate gets wiped, and now there's a keeper and a cadet telling a prime assessor a story with no evidence 3 days after they were caught loitering in a restricted space. Who does she believe? The overseer with 20 seasons and an old crest, or the 2 who were where they shouldn't be? Senet's quills flattened. He was right. She hated that he was right. She had spent 2 seasons believing the system was a set of clean tools, and she was learning in one night that the tools all fit the hand of the one who already held them. Then what, she said. Cal looked down the dark wing toward the 9th pen. He's going to put 9 in that ring to prove the doctrine's true, he said. I'm going to be standing in it, so I think we let him. He turned the slate over in his hands. I think the only place this gets proven wrong is the exact place he wants to prove it right, in front of the assessor in the ring with everyone watching. He wants a demonstration. Something moved in the cadet's plain, tired face that Senet would remember later, when she tried to explain to the prime assessor how a 19-year-old human had walked into a killing ring and turned it. I'll give him one. The days before the inspection filled up the way. A rising tide fills a flat. Dragon drilled the wing. The 139 compliant specimens were run through their yoke forms twice a shift. The Grisho made to kneel and rise and kneel. The Thornbacks made to lock and open their armor on command. The Venok made to hold a strike an inch from a keeper's throat and not close it. All of it for the prime assessor's eye. All of it doctrine made visible. Cal watched it from the pit with his hose and learned something the keepers had stopped being able to see. The compliant specimens did the forms perfectly and hated every second, and the hate had nowhere to go, so it pooled, and a wing full of pooled hate was a thing waiting for a crack. He worked. He was handler of record now, which meant that in the daylight he stood at the ring's edge with the other handlers and learned the demonstration choreography Dragon's keepers laid out, where the specimen would enter, where the handler would stand, where the goad pole rack hung on the ring wall, the emergency lockdown panel by the overseer's platform that could seal the wing's blast doors in 4 seconds if a specimen breached. Cal noted all of it, the way he'd noted the water lines, without seeming to note anything, a slow, quiet stock-world boy doing what he was told. And at night he did the other work, the work that was not choreography. He fed the whole wing, not just 9. He had the keycard and the handler's roster and the night shift to himself, and he went pen to pen down the long gallery slow with the bad-wheeled cart, and he did for each of the 140 what he had done for the Dreadnought nothing. He stopped. He set food on the tray. He drew his hand back and waited and did not push and said, "Lo," the same 3 or 4 words in the same steady voice, and he moved on. The Grisho that flinched at Dragon's shadow took bread from Cal's flat palm on the 4th night and stopped throwing itself at the door. The Thornbacks unlocked their armor and slept in the open when his cart went by. The Venok, which the doctrine rated the most dangerous strike animal on the wing, learned the sound of the bad wheel and came to the front of its pen and lay down. He was not taming them. He would have said if you'd asked that you couldn't tame 140 apex predators in 9 nights, and he'd have been right. He was doing something smaller and it would turn out larger. He was becoming, one pen at a time, the single thing on the threshold that had never hurt them, the one cent in the gray drum that did not come attached to a pole or a collar or a starve cycle. He was making himself without a word of doctrine, the opposite of dragon. Senat watched him do it and understood, 3 nights before the assessor came, what he was building, and it took the wind out of her. He was not going to fight the wing. He was going to be the reason the wing didn't have to be fought. And in a place that had spent 20 seasons teaching 140 predators exactly who the worst thing in their world was, he was quietly, nightly, teaching them who it wasn't. "When it happens," she said to him in the crawl on the last night before Olith's ship docked, "you understand it only works once. You get one crack at it. If 9 turns wrong, if any of them turn wrong, you're in a ring with an apex and no pole and a locked door." "I know," Cal said. "Then why are you calm?" He thought about it. He was quiet the way he was always quiet, and then he said the thing she would repeat later to the prime assessor, and to the board of inquiry, and to herself for a long time after. "Because they're not going to turn wrong," Cal said. "Dragon spent 20 seasons making himself the thing they're afraid of. I spent 9 nights making myself the thing they're not." He set another strip of marrow on 9's tray and drew his hand back and waited, and the Drenok took it, gentle, and pressed its skull to the glass. He built the trap, but he built it out of animals, and he never once asked the animals whose side they were on. The thornback in the pit went wrong on the 6th night, and it was the 6th night that taught Senat the method had a lethal edge she had not let herself see. She was on the deck when the alarm strip flared. A thornback was a low, broad-plated grazer hunter from a swamp world, all overlapping armor and a temper the conditioning cycle sharpened into something the doctrine prized, a specimen that locked its plates on command and became, in a war line, a moving wall. This one was young, 3 cycles into breaking, and something in the night had tipped it over the edge the cycle was built to find. It had thrown itself at its door until the door rang, and thrown itself again, and now it stood locked and rattling its plates against the panel in a blind frenzy, doing the thing the manuals called self-directed aggression, and Cal, coming down the line with the cart, called by its right name the second he saw it. "It's panicking," he said up at the deck. "It's not aggressive, Senat, it's scared out of its mind. Kill the pit lights, all of them, now." The doctrine said the opposite. The doctrine said a self-harming specimen was a compliance failure, and a compliance failure met the pole, and Brack's hand was already moving toward the Godrak release when Senat, 2 seasons of college screaming at her, killed the pit lights instead. The pit went dark but for the low floor strips, and Cal set the cart's brake and did not go to the door, did not raise his voice, did not do a single thing the alarm wanted him to do. He sat down. On the deck grill, outside the ringing door in the dark with his back to the panel, and he began, low, to hum, no words, just the tuneless low sound Senat had heard him make down the line, the sound that meant nothing and everything at once, presence without threat, the one thing in the drum that was not the pole. The thornback hit the door once more, then it stopped. It stood in the dark on the other side of the panel, sides heaving, plates still half-locked and trembling, and it listened to a human sit outside its door and hum, and slowly, over a length of time Senat could not have endured without breaking and reaching for a tool, the animal's breathing came down. Its plates unlocked. It lowered its broad armored head to the floor by the door, close to the sound, and it lay down, and Cal kept humming. And after a while he slid a strip of marrow through the low slot and drew his hand back and did not push, and the thornback took it, and stayed by the door, near the sound in the dark. "Leave the lights dead," Cal said, quiet, "and clear the deck. It'll come all the way down if there's nobody watching and nothing bright and no pole in the room. I'll sit with it till it sleeps." Senat cleared the deck herself. And then she stood in the dark of the pit gallery and watched a 19-year-old human slide his bare hand slow through the feed slot and hold it there, palm open and still, until the panicking apex that the doctrine had already written off as a cull came and set its broad armored jaw against it, plates easing, head down, because the one human in the drum who had never heard it had sat in the dark and hummed until it believed him. The pole would have worked, she said after in the crawl, because she needed to say the hard, true thing. You know that. Brack reaches for the goad, he shocks it off the door, it locks up out of fear, and it's backed into its corner in 90 seconds. The pole works, Cal. That's the terrible part. It always works. It works tonight, Cal said. He was wiping the gripsand off his hands with a rag, unhurried. It works tonight, and the Thornback learns one more time that the worst thing in its world lives on this wing, and the next time it panics harder, because now it's scared of the panic and the pole both. That's what the cycle makes. A wall that hates you. And a wall that hates you holds the line right up until the day it decides it would rather come apart than lock a plate for you one more time, and then it comes apart in the middle of your war. He folded the rag. The pole works every night. That's how you end up with 6 seasons of it and a wing full of animals waiting to turn. Slow works too. It just also works the night after and the year after, because the animal isn't counting the shocks. It's counting the times you sat in the dark instead of reaching for the rack. Senat looked down the long gallery, at the pens, at the low floor strips, at the shapes of 140 apex predators that had spent their lives learning who the worst thing in the world was, and were, one slow night at a time, being taught by a stock world boy who it wasn't. You're building something, she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. Pen by pen, you're not just working 9, you're working all of them the same way. I'm not building anything, Cal said. I'm just the guy with the cart who doesn't hold a pole. If that turns into something, it turns into something. But I'm not doing it to build. I'm doing it because the Thornback was scared. He picked up the cart's handle and the bad wheel took his weight and began to sing, and down the line, pen after pen, the wing came to the front of its gates for the sound of it. That's the other half nobody writes down. You don't do it to get an army. The second you're doing it to get an army, you're holding a pole again. You just can't feel it in your hand. You do it because the animal's scared, and you're the one thing that isn't the thing it's scared of. He moved off into the dark. Whatever that grows into, that's the animal's to decide, not mine. Senat stood a long time in the crawl after the cart's song had faded. She had been graded highest in her cohort at making 140 animals afraid. She was learning, one night at a time, from a boy who refused to be building anything, exactly what fear had cost the coalition, and exactly what was going to happen if all that patient, gentle, unbuilt trust ever found itself in the same room as the man who had spent 20 seasons being the thing they feared. The record on Specimen 9 ran to 9 pages and told Cal nothing he wanted to know. So on the night the assessor's ship docked, he stopped reading it and asked the animal instead. Not in words. 9 had no words and Cal had no illusions. But there was a way of sitting with a creature that let it show you the shape of what had made it, if you were patient, and if you were still. And Cal had learned that shape by shape over a stock world childhood, and he read it now off the Dreadnought the way you read weather off a sky. He sat with his back to the panel, and the pup lay against the glass behind him, and he let the animal's body tell him the parts the file left out. The file said, Dam designation Dream Vapex Prime, cradled at the fall of the Dream system, expired in transit. It said the juvenile, one of a litter of 4, was the only survivor of the transit. It did not say what the transit had been. Cal knew what a transit was. He'd loaded stock into a hauler for market since he was old enough to lift a gate. He knew what 4 apex cubs in a stung cradle beside their dying, cradled dam would have been, in the dark of a coalition hold, for the weeks it took to cross to the threshold. He knew the pup had come out of that dark the last of its blood, and had been put in a pen, and had been introduced to the pole on its first day by keepers who had been told the dreamed line was dangerous, and had decided to get their dominance in early. The pup had a mark on its left foreleg, a seam in the plating where something had healed wrong. The file said abrasion, conditioning. Cal knew a collar burn when he saw one. "They started on you the first day," he said. "Before you'd done a thing." The Drennock's breathing changed against his back, a long, slow settle, and its silent call dropped to the low register it used when it was easy, and Cal understood that the animal had not been unbreakable at all. It had simply arrived already knowing what the pole was for, because it had watched its dam die cradled, and it had decided in whatever way a Drennock decided things that it would take the burns and take the starve and take the pole, and it would not ever give these people the one thing they wanted, which was to be feared into their hand. It had refused to be broken the way some animals refuse to eat. It was not the strongest thing on the wing. It was the most stubborn, and stubbornness that will die before it yields is the one thing dominance cannot touch, because dominance runs on the thread of an end the animal is no longer afraid of. And then a slow, quiet cadet had come down the line one night and set food on the tray and drawn his hand back and not pushed, and the Drennock, which had decided the whole species was the pole, had been handed the first evidence in its life that it might be wrong. "That's why it's you," Senet had said in the crawl. It was not why it was Cal, it was why it was anyone. Cal had just been the one who was slow. He stayed until the low call had gone to sleep, and then he got up careful and went to fill the cart, because the wing still had 139 other pens, and 9 nights was 9 nights, and he did not intend to waste one. Prime Assessor Olith came off her ship the next morning with a retinue of 4, and the particular economy of movement that told Senet, watching from the deck rail, that this was a Sethiri who had spent a career being lied to and had stopped finding it interesting. She was old. Her crest had gone the pale gray of high age, and she wore it clipped short, which no vain Sethiri did, which meant she was not vain, which meant Dragon's old fan of quills was going to read to her exactly as it read to Senet now, as a thing a male did when he had something to sell. She walked the wing at Dragon's shoulder, and she did not react to the yoke forms, did not exclaim at the Grisho kneeling and rising, did not do any of the things the overseer's choreography was built to produce a reaction to. She watched, she asked short questions and listened past the answers. "Your yield figure is high," she said, at the ring's edge, watching a Venok hold a strike an inch from a keeper's throat. 99.3 compliant. The next wing overruns 81. "My methods are exact, Prime Assessor," Dragon said. "Your methods are the same methods," Olith said. "The doctrine is not proprietary. 18 points of compliance do not come from exactness." She turned her old head and looked at him, unhurried. "They come from somewhere. I will want to see your loss records, specimens that failed conditioning, incineration logs." Senet, on the deck, felt her stomach drop, and 40 feet below, Dragon's oiled crest did not so much as tremble. "Of course," the overseer said, warm. "Brack will pull them for your office this evening, though I will say, Prime Assessor, that a wing which loses fewer specimens is a wing that conditions them faster, and a wing that conditions them faster shows a higher yield. The figure is not a mystery, it is merely good work." He smiled the smile. "I keep very complete records." He did, too. Senet knew he did. He had had 20 seasons and the last 9 days to make the incineration logs complete, and by the time they reached Olith's office they would balance to the specimen, and the Grisho at Hesk Reach would be ash on every page, and the Prime Assessor with her career of being lied to would find nothing to catch her old gray eye, because the one man good enough to catch her was the one who'd built the lie. Cal had been right. The manifest was not the place this got proven. The office was not the place. There was only one place, and it was the ring, and the demonstration was set for the second morning. Olith's tour brought her, at the end, to the 9th pen. She stood in front of the glass a long time. The Drennock had gone to the back of the pen when the retinue came down the line. It went to the back for everyone but Cal, and it watched the Prime Assessor out of the shadow with all 3 eyes, and Olith watched it back. And something passed between the old Sethiri and the young apex that Senet, up on the deck, could not name and would think about for years. The dreamed juvenile, Olaf said. Specimen 9, said Dragon. Class 9, unyoked. The last of the dreamed apex line, prime assessor, and the one specimen on this wing the doctrine has not been able to certify. He let it land, the fond regret of a craftsman with one flaw in his work. I mean to resolve that for you tomorrow, in the ring. A demonstration of what the doctrine does with an animal that will not yield for your certification, and for the instruction of the wing. Olaf looked at the Drenok in the dark of its pen. It has killed a handler. Keeper chorus, last cycle. And you will put a handler in the ring with it tomorrow. The doctrine requires a handler of record, Dragon said. A cadet. He has been working the specimen for the preparation period. He is adequate. Olaf's old eyes moved, unhurried, along the deck and found Senet at the rail and moved on and found down in the pit, the slow, quiet human coiling a hose, the handler of record, 19 years old and not looking up. She looked at the boy for a moment longer than she had looked at anything else on the tour. Adequate, she said, in a tone Senet could not read, and turned to go. Dragon came to Cal that evening, alone, off the deck, down on the wing floor where the cameras had a blind spot the overseer knew about because the overseer had placed the cameras. He did not threaten. That was the thing Cal would remember. A lesser man would have threatened, and a threat was a thing you could report, a thing that left a mark. Dragon simply talked, the way the powerful talk to the people they have already decided are furniture, and every word of it was a door quietly closing. You've done adequate work with the specimen, Dragon said. Better than adequate. I read the night sheets. He watched the Drenok come to the front of its pen for Cal and go still under the boy's hand, and something in the overseer's face that was almost hunger showed and was put away. It trusts you. Remarkable. The dreamed line does not give that. Its dam gave it to nothing but her own. He folded his hands. You understand what tomorrow is. A demonstration, Cal said. A demonstration, Dragon agreed. The prime assessor will watch this animal fail to yield, and she will watch the doctrine resolve what cannot be yoked, and she will certify this wing and go home. It is important, Cadet, for the instruction of the young, that the demonstration be clean. That the specimen be given every opportunity to comply, so that when it does not, the failure is seen to be the animals and not the handlers. He looked at Cal with something that was meant to be kindness, and had the shape of kindness the way his smile had the shape of warmth. You will handle it tomorrow as you have handled it these 9 nights. You will bring it into the ring gentle, the way it trusts you, so that the assessor sees an animal given every chance. And then, when I give the order, you will take the goad pole from the rack, and you will press it as the doctrine requires until it yields or turns. And if it turns, Cal said, then the doctrine will have been demonstrated, Dragon said, and you will have served the coalition, Cadet, which is the most any of us can do. He smiled the smile. Your family on Mare will be notified of your service, whatever the outcome. He walked away up the wing, unhurried, everything moving out of his path, and Cal stood at the 9th pen with his hand on the glass, and understood that he had just been told, in words with no marks on them, that he was going to die in the ring tomorrow to close a ledger, and that his family would get a letter calling it service. Behind the glass, the Drenok pressed its skull to his palm and made the low sound, and Cal breathed out slow. Slow now, he said. One more night. Senet came to the crawl that night with a decision she had made in her berth with her quills flat and her college marks lying in ruin around her, and she found the human already there, sitting with the maintenance slate dark on his knees, and she said the thing before she could lose it. I'm going to be on the emergency panel tomorrow, she said. The lockdown. Dragon assigned the deck stations this evening. He put me on the panel. Cal looked up. Do you understand what that means, she said. The panel seals the blast doors. 4 seconds. If a specimen breaches the ring, the wing goes into lockdown and nothing gets in or out until the overseer clears it, not a keeper, not a med team, not the prime assessor. He put me on it. Her voice was low and fast. He's going to give the order, and I'm going to be standing on the one control that seals you in. He's making me part of it. He read that I'd flag Nine's favorite. He thinks I'm a keeper who logs what she's told. He thinks I'll seal the door when he tells me to and log the accident and go home certified. Her crest was trembling and she let it. He's using me the way he's using you. Then don't seal it, Cal said. If I don't seal it, he seals it. There's a redundant control on the platform. All I do by refusing is get pulled off the panel and get you a stranger who'll do it faster. She had thought this through in the dark. She had thought all of it through. That's not how this works. You were right in the crawl. He built it so that the only people who could stop it can't, and the only place it comes undone is the ring, in front of the assessor, with everyone watching. She crouched, close, keeper and cadet. So tell me what you need from the panel, because I'm on it, and for 4 seconds tomorrow I'm the only person in this wing who can decide whether that door opens or closes, and I would rather decide it with you than for him. Cal was quiet a moment. Down the wing the Drenok made its sound, and the Venok answered it, low, and a Grishel shifted, and the whole gallery of pooled hate breathed in the dark. He wants the door sealed, Cal said slowly, so that when it goes wrong, no one can get to me, and the demonstration runs to the end with no interruption. He wants the lockdown. So we give him the lockdown. He looked at her. Seal it. When he gives the order, seal the door, seal it fast, seal it exactly the way he wants. Something in the plain, tired face had settled into the shape Senate would remember. He wants me alone in a locked ring with 140 predators and no way out and the prime assessor watching. Let him have exactly that. Because that's not a trap, Senat, not for me. He just doesn't know it yet. Senat looked at him for a long moment. You're going to let him lock you in, she said. I'm going to let him lock us in, Cal said. And down the length of the dark wing 140 animals that had spent 9 nights learning who the one gentle thing in the world was breathed together once, and the deck plating carried it up into the soles of her feet. The demonstration was set for the second bell, and by the first the wing had been dressed for an audience. They had brought the whole roster to the ring. That was Dragon's staging, and it was, Cal understood as he watched it assemble, the center of everything. The conditioning ring sat at the wing's end, a wide sunken circle of gray composite floored in gripsond, walled to twice a keeper's height in scarred armor glass, with a ring of holding gates set into the base of the wall, the pen mouths, where a specimen could be run in from its cell without a keeper ever touching it. For an ordinary conditioning, one gate opened and one specimen entered. For a demonstration meant to instruct the whole wing, Dragon had ordered every gate loaded. 140 specimens, run from their pens through the service gates into the holding chutes that ringed the sunken floor, each one behind its own barred gate at the ring's edge, so that the entire conditioned population of the wing would watch through the bars while the doctrine resolved the one animal that would not yield. He wanted them to see it. He wanted the Grisha and the Thornbacks and the Venok to watch an unbreakable thing be broken or killed, so that the memory of it would sit in every yoked animal on the wing and hold them a little tighter to the pole. It was, Senat thought, standing at the emergency panel on the raised platform with her 3 fingers resting on the seal, the single most arrogant thing she had ever seen a keeper do. He had loaded the ring with 140 apex predators behind gates to watch. He had done it to make the lesson larger. He had never once considered that a lesson could be learned the other way. The tiers above the ring filled, keepers along the deck rail, cadets brought up from the pit to witness, human faces in a gray crowd made to watch what happened to their own. And on the high platform in the certifying seat, Prime Assessor Olith, old and clipped and unhurried, with her retinue of 4 around her and her data slate on her knee, there to certify a yield. Dragon took the platform beside her. His crest was oiled and full. He lifted a hand, and the wing went quiet, the crowd quiet of a thing that has learned to be silent when the overseer's hand goes up. "Prime Assessor," he said, "keepers, cadets, you will observe the doctrine." The 9th gate opened. Cal walked Specimen 9 into the ring the way he had walked the service line for 11 weeks, slow, on the bad wheel of nothing but his own unhurried step, no pole, no collar lead, his hands where the animal could see them. He had insisted on that, and Dragon had permitted it because it served the staging. An animal given every chance, brought in gentle by its trusted handler, so that when it turned the turning would be seen to be the beast's own nature. The Dreadnought came through the gate at his hip. It did not slink and it did not charge. It walked into the sunken ring beside the boy with its 3 eyes moving over the walls, the gates, the crowd, the loaded population of the wing bared behind the bars, and it stayed at Cal's hip, and the low sound came up out of its chest and rolled around the armor-glass drum, and every specimen on the wing heard it. Senet saw the Grisho at the nearest gate turn its head toward the sound. She saw a Venok 3 gates down come to the bars. She saw, all around the ring, 140 conditioned predators orient, not on the Dreadnought, not on the crowd, on the boy. On the slow, quiet thing that had come to their pens for 9 nights and set food on the tray and drawn back its hand and never once held a pole. And she understood, with her fingers on the seal and her career in ashes and her heart going hard against her ribs, that Dragon had not loaded the ring with an audience. He had loaded it with a congregation. Down on the gripsand, Cal stopped in the center of the ring with the Dreadnought at his hip and looked up at the platform, at the overseer, at the old gray assessor, and he waited. "The specimen," Dragon announced, "has been given every opportunity to yield. It has a handler it trusts. It enters calm. Observe now what the doctrine requires when calm is not enough, when an animal's nature will not bend to the hand of the coalition." He looked down at Cal, and his voice took on the warm public register of a teacher. "Handler, take up the pole." The goad pole rack hung on the ring wall, 3 strides from where Cal stood. A goad pole was a 2-meter shock lance, the tool that had built the whole wing, the thing every animal in that drum knew in the seam of its plating and the burn of its memory. Dragon wanted the boy to take it up. He wanted the Dreadnought to see its trusted handler cross the ring and lift the pole and become, in one motion, the thing it had learned the whole species was. He wanted the betrayal on the animal's face, because a betrayed apex was a turning apex, and a turning apex an inch from a human was an accident, and an accident closed the ledger. Cal did not move toward the rack. "Handler," Dragon said, and the warmth in it thinned. "Take up the pole." The wing was silent. The Prime Assessor watched, old eyes still. And Cal Orden 19, a stock-world boy standing on gripsand in a ring loaded with 140 predators and 1 certifying official, and 1 corrupt overseer and 1 goad pole 3 strides away, put his hand flat on the Dreadnought's skull, where he had put it through the glass 100 nights, and said, not loud, but in the drum of the ring the armor glass carried it everywhere, "No." Dragon's smile came before the lockdown, and Senet, standing over the seal, saw it happen and understood it as the last free thing that man would ever do. It was not rage. Rage she could have understood. Dragon had built a demonstration on a boy taking up a pole, and the boy had said no in front of the Prime Assessor, and a lesser overseer would have flushed and shouted. Dragon smiled. He had 20 seasons of everything moving out of his path, and he had a redundant control on his own platform, and he had, she realized in the half-second the smile lasted, already stopped needing the boy at all. The boy had made himself unnecessary. If the handler would not turn the animal with the pole, then the overseer would simply skip to the outcome the ledger required, and the refusal on the record would only make it cleaner. A handler who lost control of a Class 9 specimen, a cadet who would not do his duty, an accident entirely the human's fault. Then the specimen, Dragon said, warm again to the assessor, to the crowd, will demonstrate its nature without prompting, as unyoked apex predators do. And his hand moved not to any pole but to the console on his own platform, to the master gate release, the control that in an ordinary drill opened one holding gate at a time. He opened all of them. Senet heard it before she saw it, the deep triple chime of a full ring release, the sound the wing had never once made because no keeper in 20 seasons had ever been mad enough to open 140 gates into one ring at one time. Around the sunken floor, every holding gate racked back at once. 140 apex predators, the entire conditioned population of the threshold's wing, loosed together onto the gripsond where a single unarmed human stood with his hand on a Drenok's skull. Dragon's other hand came down flat on the platform rail, and his voice cracked across the ring in the emergency register. "Containment breach," he called for the record for the assessor for the inquiry that would come, his face arranged into alarm he did not feel. "Handler has lost the specimen, the ring is breached, panel. Seal the wing. Lockdown now." He looked, in that instant, straight up the platform at the young keeper standing over the emergency seal. He had chosen her for this. He had read her night sheets and decided she was a keeper who logged what she was told and sealed doors when she was ordered. A small, ambitious thing who would do her part and go home certified. He was ordering her, in front of the prime assessor, to seal a 19-year-old human into a locked ring with 140 loosed apex predators, and to log it as an accident, and to spend the rest of her career knowing she had done it. Senet Ver looked down at the boy on the gripsond. He was not running, he had not moved. He stood in the center of the ring with 140 predators loosed around him and his hand flat on the Drenok's skull, and he had turned his face up toward the platform, toward her, toward the seal under her fingers, and he was not afraid, and he gave her, across all that space, the smallest nod. "Seal it," the nod said, "exactly the way he wants." "Panel," Dragon roared, "seal it." Senet brought her hand down on the seal. The blast doors of the conditioning wing dropped on their 4-second cycle, one after another around the whole gallery, great slabs of gray coming down with a sound like the station clearing its throat, and the last of them sealed the ring level itself, and the wing went into total lockdown, nothing in, nothing out, no keeper, no med team, no prime assessor, no overseer, until the man who had ordered it chose to lift it. Dragon had what he wanted. The boy was alone in a locked ring with the loosed wing and no way out, and the certifying official of the coalition watching from behind sealed glass, and the demonstration would now run, uninterruptible, to its end. The triple chime died, the gates stood open and empty, and in the sudden ringing quiet of 140 apex predators loosed at once onto a single human, nothing happened. Cal stood on the gripsond with his hand on the Drenok's skull. All around him, the wing came off the gate mouths and out onto the sand and did not charge, did not scatter, did not turn on the small, warm shape in the center the way every law of the doctrine said a loosed apex must. They came off the gates and they oriented, 140 heads swinging to one point, and the point was the boy, and the low sound came up out of the Drenok at his hip, and rolled around the sealed drum and was answered first by one Grishaw, then by the Venok, then by a dozen throats, then by the whole loosed wing, a pressure below hearing that Senet felt through the sealed glass and the platform and the soles of her feet and the roots of her teeth. 140 predators making at once the sound a Drenok makes when it has decided a small, unarmed thing is not food and not enemy, but the third category, the one the Sethiri had no word for and had never earned. Down on the gripsond in the center of the sealed ring, Cal Orden took his hand off the Drenok's skull and stood, ordinary and slow and unafraid, in the middle of the largest pack any Sethiri had ever seen assemble, and the pack drew in around him, not to bring him down, to stand with him. "Slow now," Cal said into the sound. "Easy, we're all right." And the whole loosed wing settled its weight, and turned together, 140 apex heads swinging as one, up toward the sealed platform and the oiled crest of the man who had spent 20 seasons teaching every animal in that drum exactly who's sent to remember. Dragon gave the recall order out of 20 seasons of reflex, and for the first time in 20 seasons, nothing moved out of his path. Senat heard it from the platform, the sharp cutting cadence of the yoke command, the sound that in any ordinary hour would have dropped a Grishaw to its knees on the gripsand. He had a hand up. He had his crest at full display. He put the whole weight of the doctrine into his voice, the largest, highest, most inescapable fear in the animal's world, and he ordered the loosed wing down. The loosed wing did not go down. 140 heads did not so much as turn to him. They had turned already, all of them, toward the platform, toward the oiled crest and the raised hand and the voice, and the turning was not obedience. Senat had spent 2 seasons learning to read the difference between a beast that orients to a keeper, because it fears him, and a beast that orients to a keeper because it has found him. And she watched the whole wing orient on Dragon in the second way, the way a thing that has been waiting a long time finally locates what it was waiting for. Down, Dragon said again, and there was a note in it now she had never heard from him, a thin place under the command. Down, yoke form, down. His hand moved off the recall to the master gate console, and he keyed the reopen, the retreat command that would rack the holding gates back and let the specimens flow off the sand into their chutes, the standard way you cleared a ring. The gates racked open behind the pack. Empty mouths dark, the way home. Not one specimen went to a gate. A Grishaw that had knelt to that man's shadow for 2 seasons stood on the gripsand with its head lowered and its weight coming forward and did not go home. Down in the center of it, Cal Orden lifted one hand, palm out slow, the way he had raised it 100 nights at 100 pens, and the pack around him breathed and settled and held for him, not for the overseer, held on the boy's open palm the way the Drennock had always held. And Senat understood, with her fingers still on the seal and her whole certain world coming apart in silence, the thing that had happened here, the thing Dragon had never once considered when he loaded the ring. He had built the wing's obedience out of fear, and the moment there was a thing in the ring more compelling than fear, the fear had nothing left to hold. He had made himself the largest terror in the animal's world, and the boy had made himself the one thing that had never hurt them, and when both stood in the same ring, the choice was not close. Fear commands only until something better arrives. The boy was something better. He had been arriving, one slow night at a time, for 11 weeks, and now he stood on the gripsand with the whole loosed wing gathered at his back like a tide come in. And the man who had ordered the lockdown was the one standing behind glass with nowhere to go. Assessor, Dragon said, turning, and the warm public register was gone, cracked through. Prime Assessor, you see the specimen has the handler has incited. This is sabotage. This is a coordinated. He was reaching for the shape of a report even now, even as his hand went back to the console and keyed fast the redundant emergency seal, his own control, the one he had kept so that no keeper on the panel could ever countermand him. He was trying to lift the lockdown. He was trying to open the wing and get the doors up and the med teams in, and the pack contained by weight of numbers. Because a locked wing that had been his weapon 2 minutes ago was now the box he was standing inside. The lockdown did not lift. Senat looked at her own panel. The seal under her fingers glowed steady. She had not released it, and Dragon's redundant, keyed from the platform, met her hold on the primary, and the 2 controls did what the system did when a keeper and an overseer disagreed about a lockdown. It stayed sealed, fail-safe, closed, until both agreed to open it or the certifying official present overrode them both. The wing stayed shut. The door stayed down. And the only certifying official present was an old gray Sethiri sitting very still in the certifying seat with her slate on her knee, watching 140 predators she had come to certify, as weapons stand instead as a shield, around an unarmed human boy. Prime Assessor, Dragon said, and now it was plain, now the crack ran all the way down. Override the seal, override the panel, The keeper is malfunctioning. The seal is fouled. Assessor, order the wing open. Olith did not move for a moment. Then she looked, unhurried, from the sealed ring below to the young keeper standing white-knuckled over the primary seal, and back to the overseer whose oiled crest had begun, very slightly, to tremble. "You opened 140 gates," Olith said. Her old voice was quiet, and it carried onto a single handler and called it a breach. She let that sit in the sealed drum. "No, I don't believe I'll order the wing open just yet, Overseer. I find I would like to see how your demonstration ends." Down on the gripsand, Cal kept his palm up and his voice low and the pack against his back, and he did the only thing he had planned to do, which was nothing and everything at once. He did not send them. That was the part he would try later to make the inquiry understand, and would never fully manage, because the inquiry wanted a human who had commanded a war pack, and the truth was smaller and stranger than that. He had not raised an army. He had not taught the wing a single command in 9 nights. He had taught them one thing only, which was that he was the thing that would not hurt them, and the whole shape of what happened next came out of that one thing and nothing else. He did not have to point the pack at Dragon. He only had to not hold them back from the one scent in the sealed drum that every animal in it had spent 20 seasons learning to hate. And he did hold them back. That was the thing. He stood in the center of 140 loosed predators with the man who had meant to kill him trapped behind glass 30 feet up, and Cal Orden kept his palm out and said, "Slow now. Slow. Easy," and the tide that wanted to go held because he asked it to. He was not sure why he asked it to. He would think about that for a long time. The man had loaded a ring with 140 animals to kill a boy and close a ledger. The man had a letter half-written to a stock world. The man had put a collar on the seam of a pup's foreleg its first day alive in the dark. There was a version of Cal, a younger one, 3 days younger, who would have taken his palm down and let the tide go and not lost a night's sleep. But he had spent 9 nights becoming the one thing on the wing that did not hurt, and he found, standing on the sand, that he could not put it down that easily, even for Dragon, that the whole reason the pack was his was that he was not the pole, and the moment he used them as one, he'd have been. So he held them. And the holding was its own kind of terrible, because every animal in that ring felt him hold, and every animal in that ring understood that the thing between the overseer and the end of the overseer was one 19-year-old human's open hand, and Dragon understood it too. Senat watched it land on the man's face from the platform. She watched Dragon look down into the ring at the boy he had called Adequate, the cadet from the stock world, the furniture, and understand that his life was at this moment being held out of the reach of 140 predators by the deliberate mercy of the person he had marked for an accident. She watched the overseer, who had spent 20 seasons as the largest fear in every room, learn what it was to be small. "Call them off," Dragon said. It came out of him thin. "Handler, cadet. Call them off and I will. There will be a commendation. There will be your family, your billet, whatever you call them off." Cal looked up at him. He was tired and plain and his hand was steady. "They're not on," Cal said. "That's what you never understood. They were never on. You can't call off a thing that isn't a weapon." He turned his palm slow and the pack breathed. "You built the whole wing to be a weapon in your hand, and it turns out you can't own a thing by making it afraid of you. You can only rent it." And the rent came due the first night somebody walked down that line slow and didn't hold a pole. It came apart for Dragon the way a broken thing comes apart, from the inside, quietly, and Senat, who had been graded highest in her cohort at producing exactly this collapse in animals, watched it happen to a Sethiri for the first time and could not look away. His keepers went first. There were 4 of them on the platform level and the deck, the ones Dragon trusted, the ones who had pulled the incineration logs and loaded the ring and knew what the demonstration was for. When the recall failed and the gates stood open and the pack did not scatter, they understood before their overseer did that the doctrine had come off its hinges, and they did what the doctrine makes in the end. Of the ones who serve it, they ran. They broke from the deck rail and went for the sealed blast doors and beat on the gray slabs with the flats of their hands, and the doors did not lift, because a certifying official had decided to see how the demonstration ended, and the men who had loaded the ring found themselves sealed into it with the thing they had loaded. One of them still had a goad pole. Senet saw him take it off the deck rack, the reflex of a keeper reaching for the tool that had always worked, and she saw him level it at the sunken ring as if 2 meters of shock lance could hold back a tide, and she opened her mouth to call out and did not have to. Because the Drennock at the boy's hip lifted its head, and the low sound changed, dropped, hardened, went to a register Senet had never heard on the night deck, the register the manuals meant when they wrote Killing Challenge and got it wrong. It was not for the boy, it was for the pole. 140 animals that had spent their lives learning what a leveled goad pole was heard the Drennock name it, and the tide that Cal was holding leaned, all at once, toward the man on the deck who had raised the one thing in the drum they hated more than dragon. Down, Cal said sharp, the only sharp word he had spoken, slow, and to the keeper on the deck without turning, put it in the rack, right now, put it down, they know what it is. Put it down and get to the doors and pray she opens them. The keeper put the pole in the rack. His hands were shaking. He got to the doors. And Dragon, alone now on his platform with his crest wilting and his men beating on sealed gray and his career and his freedom and his life, all standing 30 feet below him inside the reach of a pack he could no longer command, did the thing that broke Senet's certain world the last of the way. He keyed the redundant seal again, uselessly. He ordered the recall again, and the recall did nothing. And then Overseer Dragon, who had knelt 100 Grisha with his voice, who had been the largest terror in the gray drum for 20 seasons, put his back to the armor glass and slid down it to the platform floor, and his long limbs folded under him, and his crest went flat against his skull, and a smell came off him, sharp and sour, that Senet knew, because she had smelled it 100 times on the wing floor, coming off the animals under the pole. It was the smell of a thing that has voided itself in fear. He had taught it to every specimen in the drum. And now, in front of the prime assessor of the coalition, in front of the deck and the cadets and the whole sealed wing, the overseer of the threshold sat in the certifying platform in the posture of a broken Grisha, flattened, fouled, gone small, made at last into the exact shape he had spent his life making of things that would not obey, and the boy on the sand had never touched him, and the pack had never reached him, and there was no wound on him anywhere. The doctrine had resolved an animal that would not yield, precisely as advertised. It had simply resolved the wrong one. The wing stayed sealed for another hour, and in that hour the prime assessor of the coalition conducted, from behind armor glass, the strangest negotiation of her long career, with a 19-year-old human standing on gripsand at the center of 140 apex predators, because he was the only authority in the drum that the drum recognized. Olith understood the situation faster than her retinue did. Her retinue wanted the doors opened, and a stun cradle team run in, and the specimens cradled, and the ring cleared by force, and Olith watched them want it and did not permit it, because she had spent a career being lied to and had developed, in place of trust, a very clear eye for what was actually true in a room. What was true in this room was that any team that came through those doors with cradles and poles would die, and would take the boy with them, because the pack that stood around the human would read a breaching team exactly as the pack had read the leveled goad pole, and the only thing holding 140 predators in check was the open hand of a stock world cadet who was, at this moment, the single most important person on the threshold, and did not appear to know it. So she did not open the doors. She keyed the ring's address channel, the one that let the platform speak to the sand, and she spoke to the boy directly, old gray Sethiri to young human, over the heads of her own retinue. "Handler," she said, "Cadet Orden, can you hear me?" Cal looked up. Yes, ma'am. I am Prime Assessor Olaf. I'm the ranking coalition authority present, and as of this moment I have relieved Overseer Dragon of his command, which I expect changes very little for you at the center of that ring, but changes a great deal for him. She watched the boy take it, unhurried, the way he took everything. I have a wing full of loosed Class 9 specimens and a certifying team that would like to run cradles in and get themselves killed. I do not intend to let them. So I am going to ask you a question, and I would like the truth, because I have had a career of the other thing and I am too old for it. Can you put them back? Cal was quiet a moment. The Drenok pressed its skull against his hip. Not the way you mean, he said. I can't order them. They're not yoked. I never yoked anything. He looked around the ring at the tide of them, at the Grisho and the Thornbacks and the Venok and the 100 more, all of them oriented on him, waiting. But I can walk them home. If your people put the poles down and stay off the deck and open the pen gates from the far panel and don't come near, I can walk them back. One at a time, they'll go if I go with them. He paused. It'll take a while. I have time, said Prime Assessor Olaf, and no other good ideas. Do it your way, Cadet. My people will not touch a pole. You have my word, which I do not give often. She turned her head. Keeper, on the panel. Senat straightened. You held that seal against the Overseer's redundant. That took a spine I did not expect to find on this deck. You will open the pen gates as the Cadet calls for them, and you will not open the blast doors until the ring is clear and I say so. Do you understand your orders? Yes, Prime Assessor, Senat said, and her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that later when she remembered it. And so it was done the way Cal did everything, slow. He walked the wing home one animal at a time. He would go to a specimen where it stood on the sand, and put his hand where the animal could see it, and say the low words and turn, and walk toward the gate mouth of that animal's chute. And the animal would go with him, off the ring, into the dark of its own pen, and Senat would key the pen gate shut behind it from the far panel, and Cal would turn and walk back out onto the sand for the next one. 140 times. The Venok went easy. The Grishaw that had knelt to Dragon's shadow leaned its great broken head against the boy's chest at the gate and stood there a moment before it went in, and Cal let it, and said something too low for the address channel to catch, and the Grishaw went home. It took the better part of 2 hours, and Cal did not hurry a single one of them. And the whole time the Drenok walked at his hip and did not go to its own pen, because its pen was wherever the boy was, and Cal did not make it. The Prime Assessor watched the entire thing from the certifying seat with her slate dark on her knee, taking no notes, and when it was done, when 139 specimens were behind their gates, and only the Drenok remained at the boy's hip, in the center of the empty ring, she sat a while longer in silence. In 40 years of certifying war assets, Olaf said finally to no one to the sealed drum, I have never once seen a keeper walk a loosed wing home without a cradle, a pole, or a wound. She looked down at the boy and the pup. I came here to certify a doctrine. I believe I have witnessed its refutation instead. Keeper, open the blast doors, slowly, and someone bring me the Overseer's ledgers, all of them. Beginning with his incineration logs and his outbound transfer manifests, and I would take particular care, if I were the person fetching them, to note which specimens are recorded as ash. Her old eyes had not left Cal. Because I have just watched 140 animals choose a human over the man who owned them, and animals do not lie about who has hurt them. I find I no longer believe a single figure in this Overseer's very complete records. They took Dragon out of the wing on a cradle litter, which was the last humiliation, and the one Senat found she had no pity to spare for. He had not been touched. That was the thing the med team could not make sense of, kneeling over the Overseer where he had folded against the armor glass. No wound, no mark, no bite, nothing the doctrine could account for. 140 apex predators loosed at arm's reach, and the man they had turned on did not have a scratch. They cradled him because he could not stand, and he could not stand because something in him had gone the way it goes in a broken Grisho, all at once and all the way down, and Senet watched them carry the largest fear of her 2 seasons out of the wing flat on his back with his crest gone slack, and she understood that the pack had done to Dragon the one thing worse than killing him. They had shown him, and the prime assessor, and the deck, and the cadets, and every yoked animal in the drum, exactly what he was without the pole in his hand. He tried to speak once going out. He got his head up off the litter and found the boy still standing in the ring, and he said, in a voice with nothing left holding it up, "It was in the records, the specimens. It was all the records are complete. There is no manifest, there is no." "Hesk reach," Cal said, quiet. He did not raise his voice, the drum carried it. "Consignment routed 6 weeks ago. 9 Grisho, 4 Thornbacks, 2 Venok marked ash on your incineration log, marked alive on the outbound manifest, paid against a private code. Pen 31. I mopped it myself." He looked at the man on the litter without heat and without mercy, a stock world boy laying out the arithmetic. "You should have wiped the maintenance slate in the service crawl. You wiped the office copy. You forgot the wing keeps its own." Prime Assessor Olith on the platform made a small note on her slate, the first note she had made all day. "Take him to the brig deck," she said. "Full seal. He is not to touch a records terminal, and he is not to be left alone with anything he can key. Adjunct, pull the maintenance slate from the service crawl behind the 9th pen before anyone else goes near it, and log its chain of custody to me personally." She rose from the certifying seat, old and unhurried, and for the first time all day she came down off the platform toward the ring, toward the sand, toward the boy and the Drennock, and her retinue moved to stop her and she waved them off. "The specimen," a retainer said. "Prime Assessor, it's a Class 9, it's loose, you can't." "I have watched it for 2 hours, Olith said, "and it has not looked at me once. It has looked at nothing but him. I am in no danger from that animal." "Nobody in this wing is in danger from that animal except the man on the litter, and I've just had him carried out." She came down the last of the platform stairs and out onto the gripsand, an old gray Sethiri walking unarmed across a conditioning ring toward a human and an apex, and the Drennock lifted its head and watched her come and did not rise, because the boy's hand was on its skull and the boy was easy, and if the boy was easy, the drum was easy. She stopped a few feet away. Up close she was older than she had looked from the platform, and her clipped crest and her steady eyes made Senet think, absurdly, of the mean old stock sire Cal had mentioned in the crawl, the one you didn't have to break because it had nothing to prove. "Cadet Orden," Olith said, "from Mare." "A stock world, your file says. Grazers." "Yes, ma'am." "You have caused me a very great deal of trouble," the Prime Assessor said, "and shown me a very great deal of truth in the space of a single morning, and I have not yet decided which I am more grateful for." She looked down at the Drennock, at the seam of healed plating on its foreleg, at the collarbone the file called abrasion, at the 3 amber eyes fixed on the boy. "Tell me one thing, and tell it to me straight, because I will build what I do next on your answer. This animal." The last of the dreamed line. "My office sent me here to certify it as a war asset or condemn it as a failure. Which is it?" Cal put his hand flat on the Drennock's skull, and the pup pressed up into it, and the low sound came, easy now, the easy register, and rolled around the empty ring. "Neither," Cal said. "It's not a weapon and it's not a failure. It's just an animal that watched its whole family die in the dark of one of your holds and got put in a pen and got a collar on the first day for something it hadn't done and decided it would die before it gave you people the one thing you wanted." He looked up at the old assessor. "It's the most stubborn thing I've ever met, that's all. You can't break a thing that's already decided to die stubborn. Dragon couldn't. Nobody could." "All I ever did was not try." He was quiet a moment. "It doesn't want to be your war asset, it never will. But it followed me around a locked ring full of loosed predators for 2 hours, and it hasn't left my hip since your overseer opened the gates, so I don't know what your office wants to call that. I just call it slate." Prime Assessor Olith looked at the boy, and the animal, and the empty ring, and the sealed pens down the long gallery where 140 predators had just been walked home by an unarmed human, and something moved behind her old gray eyes that Senat, watching from the panel, would spend the rest of her career trying to live up to. Slate, Olaf said, "Yes. I think that will do." She turned to go and paused and said, over her shoulder, in the voice of a Sethiri who has spent 40 years signing certifications she did not believe and has just found one she does, "You will not be filing an incident report, Cadet. You will be filing a method. I intend to read it very carefully." The human cadets had watched the whole of it from the witness tier, and it was the human cadet Senat found herself unable to stop thinking about in the days after. There had been 9 of them brought up from the pit to witness the demonstration, 9 stock world and colony world humans in gray cadet fatigues, the lowest rung of the threshold, the ones who shoveled and hosed what the Sethiri found beneath them. Dragon had meant them to watch a monster be broken and carry the fear of it back down to the pit. Instead, they had watched one of their own stand unarmed in a locked ring, while 140 apex predators chose him, and Senat had been close enough to the tier to see what did and did not happen on their faces. They had not cheered. That was the thing that stayed with her. When the wing turned toward Dragon's platform, when the overseer folded against the glass, when the boy walked the loosed pack home one animal at a time, the human cadets had watched in a silence that was not fear and was not triumph. It was recognition. They had looked at the slow, quiet boy in the center of the ring the way you look at a thing you already knew, and had never been able to say out loud. And Senat understood, watching them, that she had spent 2 seasons on the threshold thinking of the humans as the lowest rung, and had never once wondered why a coalition that broke apex predators into weapons kept a supply of unarmed humans around to do the work no one else would go near the animals to do. She asked Cal about it later in the crawl. Why the humans? Why, of all the species the coalition had, it was the humans who got sent to the wings? "Because we'll go in," Cal said, "that's all. Ask a Sethiri to walk down a line of Class 9 pens with nothing but a cart and they won't, because they're not stupid, and they know what's in the pens, and they know the pole's the only thing standing between them and it. So they send us, the cheap ones, the stock world ones, and they never stop to ask why the humans they send in keep coming back out." He was quiet a moment. "Where I'm from, you don't get to be afraid of the animal. The animal's the whole farm. You've got 300 head of something that could break your arm without noticing, and a family that eats because you go out in the dark and stand in the middle of them anyway. You learn young that the way through a herd isn't to be bigger than it. It's to be the thing that's always been there and never once been the danger. Every human raised anywhere near animals knows it in their hands before they can say it." He shrugged. "The Sethiri built a whole doctrine out of being the biggest fear in the room. We built farms out of being the one thing in the room that wasn't. You people looked at us shoveling pens and thought you'd found cheap labor. You'd found the only species dumb enough and calm enough to walk into the dark and gentle enough to be trusted, once we got there." Senat sat with that a long time. She had come out of the Keeper's College believing the humans were a client species, useful, low, unremarkable. She had watched one of them empty a ring by refusing to be afraid, and she thought now about the 9 faces on the witness tier that had not cheered, that had only recognized, and she understood that the coalition had spent a great deal of effort learning to break apex predators, and had never once noticed it was already employing the apex it should have been studying. The small, warm ones with the carts, who walked into the pens the poles were built to keep everyone out of, and came back out every time, with the monsters lying down behind them. The inquiry took 9 days, which Senat thought afterward was a fitting number. 1 day for each night the boy had walked the line. She testified on the 2nd day. Prime Assessor Olaf had commandeered the wing's records office and turned it into a chamber of inquiry, and she ran it the way she did everything, unhurried, letting the truth arrive at its own pace and catching it when it did. Senat came in expecting to be a small witness, a junior keeper who had held a seal, and found instead that the whole matter turned on a line she had written in a notes field 11 nights before, and that the old assessor had read her sheets more carefully than anyone had ever read anything of hers. "You logged the specimen's non-aggression toward the cadet," Olaf said, "on the 4th night of the preparation period, and you recommended a behavioral study." She had the sheet on the table between them. "Why?" "Because it was the truth," Senet said, "and I didn't yet understand that the truth was dangerous here. If I'd understood, I don't know that I'd have written it." She made herself say the rest. The overseer read the notes field. He assigned the cadet handler of record the same night. "I gave him the boy. I didn't mean to, but I did." "You also held the primary seal against the overseer's redundant," Olaf said, "which is the only reason the door stayed shut long enough for me to see what your overseer was. You gave him the boy, keeper, and then you took the whole wing back. I find the ledger balances." The old eyes did not blink. "Now tell me about the method. You watched the cadet work the specimens for 9 nights. I want it in a keeper's words, not a farmer's. What did he do?" And Senat, who had been graded highest in her cohort in dominance conditioning, told the prime assessor of the coalition, the thing that had unmade everything she was graded on. "He yielded first," she said. "That's the whole of it, prime assessor. In the doctrine, the keeper enters the pen as the dominant, highest, largest, most inescapable. The animal yields or it is broken. The cadet reversed it. He never entered a pen the animal hadn't invited him into. He set the food down and drew his hand back before the animal had to make him. He let the specimen look away first, every time, so that the choice to trust was the animal's and not a thing extracted from it. He made himself lower. He made himself the one who yields. And the animals gave him freely, the thing the pole takes 20 seasons to force and never fully gets." She paused. "I have watched a broken Grisho obey out of fear for 2 seasons, and I have never once seen it lean its head against a keeper's chest. It leaned its head against his, because he yielded first, and it had never happened to them before, and it turned out to be the only thing they ever wanted." Olith was quiet a long moment. "First yield," she said, testing it. "The keeper yields first." She made a note. "In 40 years the doctrine has had one axiom, keeper, and it is that the keeper never yields. You are telling me the entire war beast core of the coalition is built on the exact inversion of the thing that actually works." "Yes, Prime Assessor," Senet said. "That's what I'm telling you. I know how it sounds." "It sounds," Olith said, "like the most expensive mistake in the history of the coalition, and I have signed the certifications for 40 years of it." She set down her stylus. "Write it up. The method. Call it what it is. I will not have it filed under the cadet's name as an incident, and I will not have it lost in a keeper's notes field. It will have a name, and it will be studied, and it will, if I have anything left in this office to spend, replace the pole." She looked at the young keeper across the table. "You will author it. You watched it. First yield. Begin there." Senat wrote it that night in the berth where she had lain awake hearing a boy say slow now, and she titled it at the top of the first page in the plain declarative the assessor wanted, "The Doctrine of First Yield." She did not put her name on it as its inventor, because it was not hers. She put it on as its witness. And under the title she wrote the axiom, the one line that would go out from the threshold to every conditioning wing in the coalition over the seasons that followed and empty the goad pole racks one by one. The keeper yields first. The trust the animal gives freely is worth more than the obedience the pole extracts, and it does not turn on you in the dark. The corruption came apart the way Cal had said it would, once you had one true thread to pull. Olith's team pulled the maintenance slate from the service crawl behind the 9th pen, logged its chain of custody to the prime assessor's own hand, and opened it, and there was the outbound manifest to Hesk Reach exactly as the cadet had described it. 9 Grisho and 4 Thornbacks and 2 Venok, marked ash on the wing's incineration log, and alive on the transfer record, rooted to a private consignment against a payment code that took the assessor's fraud examiners 2 days to unwind and, when they unwound it, led to a numbered account in Dragon's clan name, and a buyer at Hesk Reach who dealt in unregistered war beasts to unregistered wars. That was theft, and theft was enough to end an overseer. But Olith had been doing this for 40 years, and she did not stop at the first true thing. She pulled the Wings handler records back 6 seasons, and she laid the specimen deaths beside the handler deaths, and the pattern came up out of the numbers the way a shape comes up out of water. Every specimen, lost to a handling accident, in 6 seasons had been a valuable specimen. Every handler killed in those accidents had been, in the weeks before, reassigned off the wing and then returned, put back on as handler of record the very shift of the death, exactly as Chorus had been, exactly as Cal had been meant to be. The specimens were not lost to their own nature. They were provoked in the ring with the pole until they turned, and the handler was standing where the turning would reach. A handler Dragon had chosen, someone with no clan to ask questions, a cadet from a stock world, a keeper in debt. The dead handler closed the file on the dangerous specimen, and the specimen condemned was not destroyed at all. It was cradled, marked Ash, and sold to Hesk Reach. He had been killing his own handlers to launder his own specimens for 6 seasons, and calling it the doctrine, and the doctrine had held his cover, because who audits a wing that keeps losing keepers to the monsters it breaks? The losses were the proof the work was dangerous. The danger was the alibi. Chorus had found the manifest first. That came out on the 7th day from the man's own quarters, from a note he'd left in a place a frightened keeper leaves a thing inside the lining of a boot, a single line in a shaking hand. I think 31 is at Hesk Reach. I think he knows I looked. Chorus had looked, and Dragon had known, and Chorus had been reassigned off the wing and put back on as handler of record for specimen 9 on the night he died, peeled to the bone by a monster that everyone agreed was simply doing what monsters do. Except Cal had sat with that monster 11 weeks, spine to spine through the glass, and had known in his bones that 9 was not a thing that killed because it was made, but a thing that killed because it was cornered. On the 8th day, the med examiners confirmed it, reluctantly, from the old incident record. The wounds that killed Chorus were not Adrenox wounds. 9 had been in the ring that night, provoked, with the pole. But the killing blow that closed the file had come after, from a keeper's blade, made to look like a beast, so that the specimen would be condemned, and the witness silenced in one clean stroke that the doctrine would explain for free. The Drenok had not killed Chorus. It had watched a man be murdered next to it and be blamed for the murder, and had gone into the record as the thing that peeled a keeper to the bone, and had spent the cycle since in a pen with a collar on its healed foreleg being called the monster by everyone who passed, until a slow, quiet boy came down the line one night and set food on the tray and drew his hand back and did not push. Senat read the examiner's finding and had to leave the chamber and stand in the cold of the service corridor a while. She had been graded highest in her cohort. She had believed the doctrine was a clean tool. She had come within one honest note of being the keeper who sealed the door, and she thought about that, in the cold, for a long time, and then she went and found the cadet, because there was one thing she needed to tell him that did not belong in any report. He was where he always was now, at the 9th pen, except the gate stood open these days by the prime assessor's order, and the Drenok came and went at his hip as it pleased. Cal was sitting on the deck grill with his back to the panel and Slate's great slate-gray head in his lap, and the pup, bigger already, Senat thought, than it had been 11 days ago, or maybe she was only seeing it clearly for the first time, lay with 3 amber eyes half-lidded, while the boy worked a thumb along the seam of the healed foreleg where the collar had been. "It didn't kill Chorus," Senat said. "I know," Cal said. He didn't look up. "I knew the first week. I just couldn't prove it. You don't sit spine to spine with a thing for 11 weeks and not know what kind of thing it is." He kept working his thumb along the scar. "Dragon told the whole wing it was a monster, called it that to my face. And the whole time the only thing in this drum that ever murdered anybody was him. He was quiet. It watched Chorus die, right next to it, and then it got blamed and collared, and everybody who walked past for a year looked at it like it was the thing that did it. His thumb stopped. No wonder it wouldn't yield. It had already learned exactly what you people were. We, Senate said, what we were. She sat down on the grill across from him, Keeper and Cadet, the way they'd sat in the crawl. I almost sealed that door for him, Cal, if I'd believed him one more day, if you hadn't told me the truth in the crawl. I was the keeper he picked because he thought I'd do it. She made herself hold his eye. I need you to know I know that. I'm not going to pretend I was always on this side. I got here 11 nights ago. You'd been here 11 weeks. Cal looked at her for a moment, and then he did the thing that undid her more than any of it, which was that he did not absolve her and did not condemn her. He just moved over on the grill, the way you make room, and went back to working the scar on the Drennock's leg. You held the door, he said. When it counted, you held it. That's the only night that was ever going to matter, and you got it right. He tipped his head at the space he'd made beside him. Slow now, sit down. He likes it when there's more than one of us and nobody's holding a pole. Dream apex, last of his line, and the thing he wants most in the galaxy is a couple of people to sit near him who won't hurt him. The pup's low sound came up, easy, and rolled down the long gallery, and one by one down the line, the pens answered it. That's all any of them ever wanted. Turns out it's not complicated. Turns out we just made it complicated because complicated was worth more money. Cal filed his method on the last day of the inquiry. 1 page, in a stock-world hand, and Prime Assessor Olith read it 3 times in front of him before she said anything at all. He had not filed an incident report. Olith had told him he wouldn't, and he hadn't. He had written at the top of the page, "You asked for the method. Here it is." And under it, in short flat lines with no doctrine in them, he had put down the whole of what he knew. Walk slow. Stop when you get there. Don't cut angles like they're going to strike, because if you act like they're going to strike, you've already told them you're prey and they'll believe you. Set the food down. Draw your hand back before the animal has to make you. Let it look away first. Always let it look away first, because the looking away is the animal choosing to trust you, and a choice you take by force isn't trust. It's just a slower pole. Never carry the rack's tool. Not once. Not even the first day. They can smell it and they remember it, and they will spend a year deciding whether you're the pole before they'll spend a night deciding whether you're the other thing. Be the other thing, every day. That's all it is. There's no technique. It just takes longer than the pole, and it doesn't come apart in the dark. At the bottom he had written one more line, and it was that line Olith read 3 times. They stay because they can leave. If your gate locks, you don't have the method. You just have a nicer cage. Open the gate. Find out what they choose. That's the whole thing. That's the only proof there is. You understand, Olith said, setting the page down at last, that I am going to build the reform of a 40-year doctrine on a single page written by a cadet who has been a keeper for 9 days. You're going to build it on the thornback that came to my hand in the dark, Cal said, and the grishaw that leaned its head on me at the gate, and 140 animals that walked home without a cradle. I just wrote down what they already proved. If they hadn't proved it, the page would be nothing. He was quiet a moment. You could file it under Keeper Ver. She's the one who'll teach it. She watched it closer than I did. I was just doing it. She was the one figuring out why it worked. Put her name on the doctrine. Mine goes on the wing. Olith looked at him for a while, the old gray eyes unhurried. First yield, she said. Keeper Ver's name on the doctrine, yours on the wing, the keeper who authored it and the keeper who is it. She almost smiled. I have spent 40 years watching ambitious keepers fight over whose name went on the work. You are the first I've met who tried to give it away. She stood. The first gate opens tomorrow, the 9th. I want the Drennock's pen unlocked first on the record, so that when the War Office asks me why I retired the pole, I can tell them it began with an apex that chose to stay in an unlocked cage, which is a thing the pole has never once produced in 40 years and never will. She paused at the door of the record's office. Cadet, keeper, whatever you are. When you set that first strip of marrow on its tray 11 weeks ago and drew your hand back, did you know any of this? The wing, the ring, the accord that's going to come out of it. Did you have the smallest idea what you were starting? Cal thought about it, honestly, the way he thought about everything. No, ma'am, he said. I just knew it was scared and I didn't want to be one more thing that scared it. That's as far ahead as I was thinking. That's as far ahead as you can think doing it right. He shrugged, tired and plain. The second you're thinking about the wing and the ring and the accord, you're not thinking about the animal in front of you, and the animal in front of you can tell. It's always been able to tell. That's the whole reason the pole never worked and we never noticed. We were always looking at what we wanted the animal to become. Nobody was looking at the animal. He stood to go back down to the wing, to the ninth pin, to the thing that had been waiting for the sound of the cart. You want the method, prime assessor. Look at the animal. Yield first. Leave the gate open. Everything else is just what happens after. The ninth gate opened the next morning, on the record, and it never locked again. And the Dreadnought stayed, and that was the first line of the accord, though no one had written the accord yet. And Olith carried the one-page method off the threshold in her own hand like a thing worth more than the 40 years of certifications behind it, because it was. On the ninth day, the prime assessor closed the inquiry, and the judgment she handed down changed more than one man's life. Dragon she gave to coalition justice. His clan name was struck from the certifying rolls, which for status theory was a wound the doctrine had no ointment for. His account at Hesk Reach was seized, and the deaths of 6 handlers over 6 seasons, Chorus and 5 others whose accidents the record had swallowed, were entered against him not as negligence but as what they were. He would not see a conditioning wing again. He would not see much of anything again except the inside of a penal transport, and at the end of it, a cell on a world where the coalition sent the ones it needed to disappear without quite executing. Senate watched them log him out of the threshold on the 10th morning, crest struck flat, clan name gone, carried past the pens of the animals he had broken while every one of them stood at its gate, and watched him go in a silence that Senate would not have traded for any amount of gloating. The wing watched its overseer leave, and did not make a sound, and the silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The dream of annexation she suspended. That was the part her retinue argued against, and the part Olith did not bend on. The whole purpose of the threshold's conditioning wing was to produce war assets for the annexation of the dream system. The Dreadnought's own home system. Senate understood now. The place they had cradled Slate's dam and left the boy pup the last of his line. Olith had come to certify a yield of 140 broken predators to march under coalition banners against the dream worlds. She certified none of them. I will not certify a single specimen on this wing as a war asset, she told her retinue in the records office on the record, because I have now seen what this wing's method actually produces, and it is not a weapon. It is a resentment with teeth, held in check by a fear that fails the instant something better walks in. I watched 140 of them fail it in one morning. I will not send the coalition to war leaning on 140 animals that will turn on their handlers the day their handlers stop being the scariest thing in the room. It is not loyalty. It is a debt, and debts come due. She set down her stylus. There is loyalty on this wing, I have seen it, but it does not belong to the coalition. It belongs to a stock world boy who yielded first, and it cannot be requisitioned, and I would not requisition it if it could, because the entire lesson of this morning is that the thing that works cannot be taken. It can only be given. Suspend the annexation. I will explain it to the War Office myself, and they will not enjoy it, and I have 40 years of certifications behind me to spend on being right about this exactly once. She looked then at the cadet, who had been called into the office to hear the disposition of the specimen he'd asked her to call Slate. Cadet Orden, she said, the specimens on this wing will not be war assets, but they exist, and something must be done with 140 apex predators the coalition has spent 6 seasons and a great deal of money conditioning. I am converting this wing, not to breaking, to your method Keeper Ver's first yield, which will be studied and taught, and if I have my way, exported to every conditioning facility flying our flag until the last gold pole is in a museum. She folded her three-fingered hands. I need a keeper of record for the conversion, someone who knows the method in his hands and not just on a page. The pay is a keeper's, not a cadet's. The billet is here, on the threshold, which I understand is not much of a reward, a gray drum at the edge of nothing. Her old eyes did not blink. But you would be running it. Your way, slow, no pole, and the animals already know you. I can order almost anything in this office, Cadet, but I cannot order 140 predators to trust a keeper, so I find myself, for the first time in 40 years, needing to ask a 19-year-old for a favor. Will you stay and run my wing? Cal was quiet a moment. Slate's head was against his knee under the table. The Dreadnought had followed him into the inquiry office, and no one had tried to stop it anymore. He worked his thumb along the healed seam of the foreleg, slow. I'll stay, he said, on two conditions. A cadet, Olaf observed, with conditions. A keeper, Cal said, with conditions. First one, Slate's not an asset, not a specimen, not a war beast, not a line in your count. He's the last of his blood, and you took the rest of it. He stays because he wants to, and he goes if he ever wants to, and nobody puts a number on him again as long as I'm keeper of record. Olaf inclined her old head. Granted, and the second. The pens come open, Cal said. Not all at once, not carelessly, but the whole point of what I did was that I never made them stay. You can't run first yield behind locked gates. The yield's not real if the animal can't leave. So the wing changes into something that isn't a prison, slow, one pen at a time, until an animal stays because this is where it chose to be and not because the gate's down. He looked at her, plain and tired and immovable. That's the method. If you want it, that's what it costs. Otherwise, you've just got the pole with a nicer name. Prime Assessor Olaf of the Coalition looked at the Stockworld boy across the table for a long moment. And then she did something her retinue had never seen her do in 40 years, which was smile. A real one, old and dry, and entirely unlike the thing Dragon's face had learned to imitate. Granted, she said, Keeper Orden, open your gates slowly. The gates came open slowly, and the wing became, over the season that followed, a thing the Coalition had no word for, which meant Senat had to invent one. She stayed. Olaf had offered her the authorship of First Yield and the running of its instruction, and Senat had taken it, and she spent that season learning the method the only way it could be learned, with her hands, on the wing from the boy, unlearning 2 seasons of college in the process, and finding the unlearning was the whole of the education. She wrote the doctrine as she learned it. The keeper yields first. You do not enter until you are invited. You set the food down and you draw your hand back before the animal makes you. You let it look away first. You become the one thing in its world that has never heard it, and you become that every day, and you never ever hold a pole. She wrote it and taught it and watched it spread off the threshold to other wings, other worlds, other keepers who had spent their whole careers being the largest fear in the room, and were, most of them, relieved to be told they could put the pole down at last, because being the worst thing in an animal's world is a tiring way to spend a life. But she was a keeper, and she kept the other half of the ledger honest too, the half the reformers off-world liked to forget when they quoted the gentle axiom. Because the other half was this: the animals that yielded to Cal did not become soft. First Yield did not tame the Dreadnought. Slate was every inch the apex his file said he was. The boy had not made him gentle, he had made himself trusted, and those were not the same thing. And the day a Coalition requisition officer learned the difference was the day the whole wing remembered its teeth. The officer came in the 3rd month, off a War Office cutter, with an order in his hand and no patience for the assessor's suspension. Senat was on the deck when he came down the line, a hard young Sithiri with a War Office crest and a stun cradle team behind him, and he found Cal at the 9th pen and told him, flat, that the Dream Apex specimen was being requisitioned as a strategic asset by order of the War Office over the assessor's objection, and that the cutter would take it within the hour, and that a keeper of record had no standing to refuse. Senet started down off the deck. She did not make it in time, and she did not need to. Cal did not raise his voice. That was the thing the requisition officer would put in his own report, baffled later, that the human never raised his voice, never touched him, never gave an order anyone could log. He simply stood up slow from where he'd been sitting with the Drennock's head in his lap, and he set his hand flat on Slate's skull, and he said, quiet, no, he's not a specimen, he stays. And down the length of the wing, 140 pens that stood open now by the keeper's own order breathed in, once together. The Vennock came out of its pen, the Grisho came out of its pen, the Thornbacks came out of the pit with their armor sliding open. 140 apex predators that had been walked home 11 weeks and 3 months ago by a boy who yielded first came out of their open gates without a sound and formed up down the long gallery, not charging, not snarling, arriving, filling the wing between the requisition officer's cradle team and the human at the 9th pen, a wall of loose teeth that had chosen freely, every day, to stay near the one thing that had never hurt them, and would not now stand still, while a hard young Sethiri with an order in his hand tried to take a piece of him away. The Drennock under Cal's hand lifted its head and made the low sound, the hard register, the one the manuals called a killing challenge, and got wrong only in that they thought it was about hunger, and the whole wall answered it, and the deck plating carried it up into the soles of the requisition officer's feet. Slow now, Cal said, not to the officer, to the wall. His hand stayed flat on Slate's skull. Slow, he's leaving. Nobody's taking anybody. Slow. And the wall held on the boy's open palm exactly as it had held in the ring. 140 predators an arm's length from a War Office cutter's crew held because the gentle thing asked them to. The requisition officer looked at the wall of teeth his order had summoned, and at the human who had summoned it by declining to be afraid, and at the Drennock's 3 amber eyes fixed on him over the boy's flat hand, and he did the arithmetic every antagonist in that gray drum eventually did, and he put his order back in his coat. The specimen, he said, and his voice was not as flat as it had been, is the War Office this will be noted. Note it, Cal said, easy. Note that the Dream Apex is off the requisition rolls, and note why. Note that it's not the pole that keeps 140 predators standing between you and a boy. It's the opposite of the pole. He tipped his head toward the sealed doors, gentle, the way you'd show a guest out. Slow now. Your cutter's waiting, and keeper this to Senat who had reached the floor walk them home when he's gone, one at a time. They'll go, they always go. That's the whole point. They stay because they can leave. The officer left. The cutter uncoupled within the hour, and Senat walked the wing home one animal at a time down the long gallery of open gates, the way the boy had taught her, and every one of them went back into a pen whose door no longer locked, and lay down, and waited for the slow bad-wheeled cart and the flat open hand and the low 3 or 4 words, because that was where they had chosen to be, and choosing it was the only thing that had ever made them anything but a debt with teeth. A year and a half later the Drennock was bigger than the Grisho, and the new cadets were afraid of it, and Senat spent the first day of every intake teaching them why they were wrong to be. She had a class now. That still surprised her some mornings, that the highest-marked dominance conditioner of her cohort spent her days teaching young keepers to yield. The threshold had become the coalition's first yield facility, and cadets and keepers came to it from a dozen worlds to learn the method with their hands, and Senat ran their instruction the way the boy had taught her, slow, on the floor, no pole. The first day was always the same. She walked the new intake down the long gallery of open gates, and somewhere around the 9th pen, a young keeper would stop and go still and stare, because Slate would be there, and Slate at 3 years was no longer a pup. He stood taller than the biggest war beast on the wing now. The slate-gray plating had come in thick and scarred and beautiful. The shoulders had spread into the impossible breadth the file had always promised. The jaw had grown into itself, and the 3 amber eyes sat in a skull the size of a keeper's torso. He was the apex the dreamed line had bred over 1,000,000 years to be, the thing his dam had been, the thing the coalition had cradled a whole world to build war assets out of, full-grown, unbroken, loose, in an open pen, with no collar and no number and no keeper of record but a young man who yielded first. "That's a Class 9 Dreadnought," a cadet said on one of those first mornings in the hush people used around Slate. "Full-grown, loose. Why isn't it? Why aren't we?" "Because it isn't a weapon," Senet said, "and it never was. Watch." And she stopped walking, the way the boy had taught her, and set her hand where the animal could see it, and let the great apex look away first, and the Dreadnought that stood taller than a war beast lowered its enormous head and pressed the flat of its skull, gentle, against her open palm, the way it had pressed against the glass for the boy 1,000 nights ago, and the whole intake of new cadets forgot to breathe. "This is what the pole was hiding," Senet told them. "This, the whole time. 20 seasons of breaking, to force a worse copy of the thing you can simply be given. He is the most dangerous animal in this facility, and he has never once been dangerous to anyone who did not raise a hand to the boy. That is not taming. Nobody tamed him. Somebody was worth trusting every day until he believed it. That's the entire method. Now put your poles in the rack at the door, you won't need them here, and he knows what they are, and I would rather you learned that from me than from him." They put the poles in the rack. They always did, after they'd seen Slate lower his head to an open hand. Cal ran the wing and did not teach the classes. Teaching was Senet's gift and the floor was his. He was 21 now and still looked like a person you'd walk past in a market, still slow, still quiet, and the 140 apex predators of the threshold's wing arranged their whole lives around the sound of his bad-wheeled cart. The gates stood open. They stayed anyway. That was the proof, renewed every single day, that the thing was real, 140 predators who could walk out of an unlocked wing and did not, because the wing was where the boy was, and the boy had never hurt them, and there was nowhere in the galaxy that mattered more than that. Prime Assessor Olith came back twice. The first time to certify the method she'd bet 40 years of authority on, and to watch a wing full of loosed apexes lower their heads to open hands, and to write, at the bottom of the certification she'd once come to deny, a single line in her own aging hand. "The doctrine of first yield is hereby entered as coalition standard, and the pole is hereby retired from every wing under my seal." The second time she came only to sit on the deck grill a while beside the boy and the grown Dreadnought and say nothing much, an old gray Sethiri near the end of a long career, watching the thing she'd spent it getting wrong finally being done right. And Cal let her sit, and worked his thumb along the old seam of Slate's foreleg where the collar had been, and the low, easy sound rolled down the gallery, and it was, Senet thought, the most contented she ever saw either of them. And then in the Dreadnought's third autumn, the dream came. They came because the annexation had been suspended, and a world that is not being conquered has the freedom to go looking for what was taken from it. The dreams were not what the coalition's War Office briefings had made them. Senet had grown up on those briefings, a savage apex world, a system of monsters that had to be broken to be governed, and the delegation that came off the diplomatic cutter was a company of tall, grave-plated beings who moved with the same economy Slate moved with, who wore no weapons and needed none, and who had come across a suspended front line under a flag of parley to ask the coalition a single question. Was it true that the last son of the prime line still lived? It was true. Olith herself confirmed it and arranged the meeting, and came to the threshold a third time to preside over it, because she understood before anyone that this was the thing her whole reversal had been building toward, and that it was not hers to decide. They brought the delegation down the long gallery to the 9th pen. Cal stood at the open gate with the grown Drennock at his hip, and the dreamed emissaries stopped a respectful distance off. And the eldest of them, a plated elder whose gray seams marked an age even Olith deferred to, looked at Slate for a long, long time, and made a sound, low below hearing, the sound Senet had felt in her teeth 100 times, and Slate lifted his enormous head and answered it. And something passed between the last son of the prime line and the elder of his blood that no one in that gallery had the right to translate. "He is the dams," the elder said at last, in the flattened coalition trade speech they had learned for the parley. "Dream Vapex Prime, we felt her fall from a system away. We were told the whole line ended in your holds." The grave old eyes moved to the boy. "We were not told one was kept. We were not told one was raised." A pause that had a great deal in it. "We were not told he was raised gentle." "He raised himself," Cal said. "I just didn't get in the way." The elder looked at him. "You are his keeper." "I'm his," Cal said, and did not explain it, and the elder seemed to understand it did not need explaining. "Then I will ask you," the elder said, "and not your coalition, because your coalition does not own what it did not make. He is the last of the prime line on a world that grieved him. We have come to bring him home, to his blood, his hunting grounds, his own kind, the whole of a world that is his by right of what he is. We can give him back everything your holds took." The grave old head lowered, the nearest thing to a plea a dreamed elder had left in it. "Will you let him come home?" And the whole gallery went quiet, because everyone in it understood at once what had just been laid at the feet of a 21-year-old human, the last, hardest yield of all. Cal did not answer the elder that day. He asked for the night, and the dream, who understood the weight of a thing given, granted it, and Senet found him where she always found him, on the deck grill at the 9th pen with the grown Drennock's enormous head in his lap, and his thumb working the old seam of the foreleg slow. "You already know what you're going to do," she said. She sat down across from him, keeper and keeper now, the way they'd sat in the crawl when they were both something smaller. "Don't you?" "I know what I have to offer him," Cal said. "That's not the same as knowing what he'll do." He was quiet a while, looking down the long gallery of open gates. "That's the whole method, Senet. That's the thing I told Olith it costs. They stay because they can leave. I've said it 100 times to 100 cadets, and I've never once had to mean it all the way down, because what was I offering them? An unlocked pen on a gray drum at the edge of nothing. That's not a real gate. That's not a real choice. Where's a Grisho going to go?" His thumb stopped. "This is a real gate, his whole world, his blood, his kind. The dream came under a parley flag across a suspended war to give him back everything we took, and if I stand between him and that, then I'm not his keeper. I'm just a nicer collar." He looked at her, plain and tired and 21. "I have to open it, all the way, and I have to mean it. And I have to be able to watch him walk up that ramp and go home and not make a sound, or none of it was ever true." Senet was quiet. Down the gallery, a Venok made a small sound in its sleep and settled. "And if he goes," she said. "Then he goes home," Cal said. "And it was the best thing I ever did, and I'll hate it every day, and that's the price, and I knew the price when I set the first strip of marrow on his tray and drew my hand back." He put his palm flat on the great slate skull, and the Drennock pressed up into it, easy, the low sound rolling out. "Slow now," he said to the animal, to himself. "One more night." They did it at the open dock, because Cal insisted the gate be real. He would not do it on the wing at the pen, where the choice was between a boy and a locked drum. He had Olith clear the station's main dock, the great pressure-doored bay where the dream cutter sat with its ramp down, and its own kind waiting at the top of it, and he walked the grown Drennock out of the conditioning wing for the first time in 3 years, down the long corridors of the threshold, out to the edge of the open dock, where the whole of the delegation stood on the ramp of the ship that could take him home, the elder of his blood at the front, the plated grave company of his own species behind. And beyond them, through the open bay, the black and the stars and the direction that led to dream, to hunting grounds, to a world that had grieved him. The station gathered to watch. Keepers, cadets, senate, the prime assessor. 140 predators could not come, but word of it went down the wing the way word goes through a pack, and the whole gallery of open gates fell into a silence that carried, and Senat understood the wing knew, the way the wing always knew. Cal walked the Dreadnought to the foot of the ramp and stopped. He crouched, the way he'd crouched at the glass 1,000 nights, so the great amber eyes came level with his. He set both hands flat on the enormous skull, the last time he would ever presume to, and he held there a moment, the boy and the apex, and then he did the hardest thing in the whole method, the thing he'd told the cadets about and never once had to do all the way down. He took his hands away. "Slow now," Cal said low, and his voice did not shake, and Senat would never know what it cost him to keep it from shaking. "Listen, this is yours, all of it." He tipped his head, gentle, toward the ramp, the delegation, the elder, the open bay, and the stars, and the way home. "Your blood's up there. Your world's out there. Everything they took from you in that hold, the dam, the litter, the dark, they came all this way to give it back. Your own kind, your own ground. You're the last of the prime line, and up that ramp is a whole world that's yours by right of what you are." He drew a slow breath. "I never made you stay. I'm not going to start now. The gate's open. It's the realest gate there is. Go home, Slate, go on, it's all right. Go home." And he stood up and he stepped back, 1 step, 2, 3, giving the animal the space, taking himself out of the choice the way first yield demanded, making himself small, yielding first, the last and hardest yield, and he put his hands at his sides and he opened them, palms out, empty, and he waited. The Dreadnought looked up the ramp. It looked a long time. The elder of its blood made the low sound, the calling sound, the sound of a world grieving its last apex home, and the whole grave company on the ramp answered it, a chorus below hearing that rolled down through the dock, plating into the souls of everyone gathered, into Senat's teeth, into her chest, the pull of a whole species reaching for the last of itself. Slate's great head lifted toward it. His 3 amber eyes fixed on the elder, on his own kind, on the ramp and the ship and the direction that was dream. He took a step toward it. He took a second. The whole dock held its breath, and Senat felt her quills go flat, and beside her the prime assessor of the coalition, who had watched 40 years of certification she did not believe, watched this one with her old gray eyes bright, because it was the only certification that had ever mattered, and it was not hers to sign. The Dreadnought reached the foot of the ramp. He stopped. He stood at the very threshold of his own world, the last son of the prime line, offered everything, the gate as real as a gate could be, his blood calling him up into the stars, and he turned his enormous slate-gray head, slow, and looked back across the space at the ordinary young man standing with his empty hands open at his sides, not making a sound, letting him go. And Slate turned around and walked back down off the ramp and crossed the open dock, unhurried, apex of an entire world he had just declined to claim, and lay down at the boy's hip with a sound that shook the plating, and pressed the flat of his enormous skull against the empty open hand, and chose him. For a moment no one on the dock moved, and Senat thought the dream would grieve, that the elder would take the refusal as a wound, that a world which had crossed a suspended war to reclaim its last apex would not bear watching that apex lie down at the hip of a human and choose the gray drum over the whole of its blood. The elder came down the ramp instead. He came slow, the way old and certain things move, and he crossed the open dock and stopped before the boy and the Dreadnought lying at his hip, and he lowered his great plated head, not to Cal and not to Slate, but to the space between them, to the thing that lay in that space that the dream, it turned out, had a word for when the coalition had none. "We felt the dam fall," the elder said. "We grieved the line. We came to bring the last of it home." He looked down at Slate, at the grown apex pressed to the empty open hand, at the ease in the enormous body that no dream had worn in a coalition hold. "We came believing home was dream, the world, the ground, the blood." The grave old head turned to the boy. We were wrong as your coalition was wrong, only gentler in our error. Home was never the world. Home is the one who never raised a hand. He made the low sound soft, and Slate answered it easy and did not rise. He is home, keeper. He has been home for 3 years. We came a long way to learn it, and it was worth the distance. He straightened slow. The prime line does not end. It only changed where it lives. We will not take him from the place he chose. We would sooner burn the ship we came in. And then the elder of the dream said the thing that turned a suspended war into something else. The thing Olith would carry to the Coalition War Office and spend the last of her 40 years' authority making stick. Your coalition came to our worlds to break our apexes into weapons, the elder said to the prime assessor across the dock. We prepared to meet you the only way one meets a thing that comes to break you, with everything we have, which is a great deal, and which would have cost you more than the dream system is worth. That war is why your holds were full. That war is why the dam fell. The grave eyes moved to the boy, to the Drennock, to the empty open hand. And then a keeper of yours yielded first to the last son of our prime line, and raised him gentle, and offered him back to us freely with the gate wide open, and asked nothing, and took nothing, and let the choice be his. In one act your keeper undid the reason for the war. The elder inclined his ancient head. We did not know your kind could do that. We were told humans came to break. We find instead that one of them came to yield. It changes what we are willing to believe about the rest of you. Send us keepers, not conditioners, and there will be no annexation to suspend. There will be an accord, because a people that yields first is a people we can stand beside. Prime Assessor Olith of the Coalition looked at the boy, and the grown Drennock, and the elder of a world she had come to help conquer and would now, instead, help befriend. And she said, in the dry old voice that had signed 40 years of certifications she did not believe. In 4 decades I have watched the pole win 3 annexations, and this wing lose 6 keepers hiding a theft behind them. She came down onto the open dock, unhurried, old and gray. And in a single season I have watched one stock-world boy who never raised his voice retire the pole, empty the requisition rolls, and end a war before it was declared, all by declining every day to be the thing an animal should fear. She looked at Cal. I came to the threshold to certify a doctrine, keeper. I am going to leave having certified you. The accord will be drafted in your method's name. First yield. The keeper yields first. Her old eyes were bright. It is going to be very hard to explain to the War Office that we ended a war by being gentle. I intend to enjoy every minute of it. The Dream Cutter uncoupled the next morning with the elder's parley flag traded for an accord seal, and the war that had filled the threshold's holds became, over the seasons that followed, a border that did not need holds at all. Senat stayed and taught. Every intake still stopped at the 9th pen on the first day, and every intake still went still when the grown Drennock lowered its enormous head to an open hand, and Senat still made them put their poles in the rack at the door. She wrote the accord's preamble the way she'd written the doctrine, plain. We came to break them, and one of us yielded instead, and it cost us nothing and gained us a world. She thought about the note she'd written in a notes field a lifetime ago, the true line that had almost gotten a boy killed, and she understood at last that the truth is not dangerous in itself, only in a place built to punish it, and that the whole of what the boy had done was make a place where the truth could be told out loud. She had come within one honest day of sealing the door. She had held it instead. It was, she decided, enough to have gotten the one night right that was ever going to matter, and to spend the rest of them getting the method into younger hands than hers. Dragon she never thought about, which was its own kind of verdict. The largest fear of her 2 seasons had become a struck clan name on a penal world, and the wing he had ruled by terror lay down every night for a boy who never raised his voice, and there was no revenge in that Senat could have designed better, because the man had not been destroyed by the pack he loaded. He had been made irrelevant by the thing he swore could not exist. The doctrine had resolved him after all. It had simply been the true one. Cal ran the wing, slow, with the bad-wheeled cart, into his 20s and past them, and the gates stayed open and the animals stayed anyway. And that was the proof, renewed every single day, that never stopped being a small miracle to anyone who understood what they were looking at. 140 apex predators who could walk out of an unlocked wing and did not, because the wing was where the boy was. He never called it loyalty in the reports. Senat did, and Olith did, and the Accord did. Cal just called it what it was in the plain stock world way he called everything. They stay because they can leave, he'd tell the new cadets on the floor, the only lecture he ever gave. That's the whole thing, there's no technique. You be the one thing in their world that never hurt them, every day, until they believe it, and you leave the gate open so they know it's true, and then you find out what they choose. He'd put his hand flat on the grown Drennock's enormous skull, and Slate would press up into it. Easy, the low sound rolling down the long gallery of open gates, and every pen on the wing would answer it. 140 throats below hearing, and the deck plating would carry it up into the soles of the cadets' feet. And if you do it right, Cal would say, they choose you, even when the gate leads home, even when it leads to the stars. He'd work his thumb along the old healed seam of the foreleg where a collar had been on the first day, before the animal had done a single thing to earn it. That's not a weapon. You can't make a weapon out of a thing that's free to go. You can only make a friend. It just took us 20 seasons and a pole and 6 dead keepers to figure out the friend was the stronger thing all along. The last of the prime line lay at his hip in an unlocked wing at the edge of nothing, apex of a world he had declined to claim, gentle with the one who had never raised a hand and lethal to anyone who ever raised one at the boy. And every night the cart came down the line with its bad wheels singing, and every night 140 predators that could have gone anywhere in the galaxy came to the front of their open pens and lay down and waited, slow, for the flat open hand and the low 3 or 4 words, because there was nowhere the whole of the black held that they would rather be. Slow now, the boy would say down the dark line to all of them and to none of them, to the thing that had chosen him over its own stars. Easy, I've got you, we're all right. And they were.